right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and we have a very special sponsored stream. Major shout out to Paisios for sponsoring today's stream, of which we're going to be covering a wide variety of topics. Honestly, one of the most controversial and misunderstood events in American history. Something that occurred in the 1980s, and we commonly refer to it as the Satanic Panic. We're going to be discussing what exactly is the Satanic Panic, what occurred during the 1980s. We'll be looking at two particular cases, the McMartin preschool scandal and the Franklin scandal, the Franklin cover-up. We're talking about cases of ritual sexual abuse from what children described as some type of satanic cult, based on the testimony of some of the children and some of the features that they described. It became associated and believed that these groups, that there were satanic groups operating in the United States, kidnapping children, sexually abusing them, and even sacrificing them. Now, the majority of the American populace began to believe these claims and the claims of the children. And what Paisios sent me a couple documents that we'll be going over as well, is how immediately the narrative shifted, where we have Geraldo Rivera doing a talk show in the mid-1980s, I think this is 1985, talking about satanic cults across America, talking about ritual abuse and secret rituals. And by 1988, 89, towards the end of the McMartin case, well, really from 85 forward, what I found is that the narrative came out that these were all false memories. And we're going to be reading a document that was sent to me by today's stream sponsor, talking about the introduction of these false memory syndromes, which is associated with a foundation. And we'll be looking at a gentleman named Ralph Underwager, who he himself made a claim that he thinks adult sexual activity with children is God's will. And so Underwager was basically one of these individuals that was trying to dismiss the testimony coming out of children. And this is why this topic is so difficult and nuanced to really speak about, because their claim is that these children were being coerced. They were being fed stories and narratives about trauma, about instances in which then their imaginations filled in the blanks, and they created stories such as the McMartin preschool scandal, which we're going to get into, which is claiming that in Manhattan Beach in California, beginning around 1983, a boy reported to his mother that he had been sodomized. Upon 3 independent investigators, they agreed that the boy had been sodomized. And then the message went out, and parents were then told about what this boy had experienced, claimed that one of the men at the preschool did it. And then other parents began asking their children if any sort of abuse happened. Multiple then testimonies from children came forth talking about underground tunnels, talking about satanic rituals, animal sacrifice, bonfires being taken to the top of mountaintops to witness satanic rituals. And then after 1985, when the police finally went and investigated the McMartin preschool, they said, well, there's no tunnels here. There's nothing here. Of course, all these claims were denied by the McMartin family who owned the preschool. And it wasn't until towards the end of the trial, in which the McMartin preschool, one was sold to, I believe, the defense attorney that was defending them, and then he sold it to a contractor which was going to demolish the school and build some type of high-rise, like an apartment complex. And before the demolition, Ted Gunderson, someone you may be familiar with, especially regarding the McMartin and the Franklin scandal, he was able to go to the McMartin preschool site, and with other investigators and archaeologists were able to uncover a series of elaborate tunnels under the McMartin preschool that had been filled in. interestingly enough. And they estimated somewhere around 2 to 3 years, which would make sense given that the first public announcement of children claiming that they've been sexually abused was in 1983. And so when the mainstream media, again, imagine 1985 America is witnessing the rise of Satanism, generally speaking. But this narrative goes out that these children are being implanted false memories. And so this new phenomenon in the world of psychology begins to diminish the testimony of children, of which there was cases in which people were falsely accused by children. I mean, even in the McMartin case, one child claimed Chuck Norris was one of the abusers. Now, obviously, Chuck Norris was not one of the abusers. A man who may have looked like Chuck Norris certainly may have been. But this is used as an excuse to dismiss the testimonies of these children. And that is part of why, when we come to the present day with Jeffrey Epstein, why it was so hard for people 10 years ago to talk about and convince people of a true pedophilic ring, national ring, or even in Epstein's case, a global ring. And it has to do with the American public during this brief window of believing that Satanism was on the rise. Within just 2 years, the public sentiment and all the mainstream outlets totally dismissed this as complete hysteria. These are just radical Protestant Christians upset with the changing of American norms and culture, and they're feeding these fictitious narratives about Satanism to their children. That became the official narrative. And if you go to do research, as I did for today's stream, on the Satanic Panic, almost every single video, especially if it's from a mainstream media outlet, makes this thing sound like it was total hysteria. There was no evidence for it whatsoever. And they'll claim that just like in the McMartin preschool case, nobody was actually charged. And then in a handful of these other instances, no one was actually charged. They don't tell you that that's due to technicalities. They make it sound like people got off because the accusations and the allegations were totally fraudulent and made up. Not the case. A lot of these people got out through minor technicalities during the investigation or even the legal matters, and that's how they got off. But this recharacterized the entirety of how the American populace deals with Satanism, or in this case, specifically, satanic ritual abuse. So that's what we're going to be getting into today. I got tons of videos. We'll be watching Ted Gunderson talking about the Franklin scandal, about the McMartin preschool scandal, about the Finders. Again, I'll introduce all this stuff to you in just a little bit. And again, there's so much to get into today. So this is not a topic, I would say. If you tend to listen to some of these streams with maybe children or younger people, I would recommend today's probably not the day. We're going to be getting into some pretty explicit matters, and I would imagine that this stream is actually going to be suppressed by YouTube because anything dealing with satanic ritual abuse is a no-no category. And so I tried to avoid putting satanic ritual abuse into anything, but we'll see how it goes. And there's so many links that Paisio sent me that unfortunately I cannot play because they'll immediately get copyrighted strike. And anything from like 60 Minutes, I've already had a problem with 60 Minutes. One of the videos he sent was from 60 Minutes Australia. They don't just flag the video, they take your whole stream down. So they'll block your entire stream. So I'm going to share some links with you guys as we move forward. But yeah. We have a lot to get into. So let me begin here by kind of giving my synopsis narrative of what we're focusing on today, because we're going to be getting into the phenomenon of false memory syndrome, how that arose as essentially an opposition to the testimonies of children and the real uncovering of satanic cults. One of which is the Finders, who was a CIA operation, and that's part of the discovery here. We're going to watch some conversation by Nick Bryant, journalist who wrote a book on the Franklin cover-up, and his experience, and him realizing that these instances where media wants to tell you that, oh, Christians were upset because, and I have a video of Jordan Peterson saying this, that in the McMartin preschool scandal, that the boy who claimed he was abused came from a mother who was schizophrenic. Now, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia later. Now, if you're on the sympathetic side, as the angle that I'm approaching today's conversation, so to lay out my biases, I think there is real substance behind the Satanic Panic. It wasn't some mass hysteria of Protestant Christians. I mean, to some degrees, yeah, okay, yes, it was. Like there was, worries about Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I'm not here to promote Dungeons and Dragons or anything, but my point is that there was a high level of anxiety of what was going on in the 1980s and what was happening in the 1970s. You have the Jesus People movement, and you have, I'll get into all this stuff. We got so much to get into. So, all right. Let me begin with my opening monologue on what the narrative is here. What is the narrative for me regarding this story? And I have to say that I view the Satanic Panic, especially after all the research for today's stream, as sincerely one of the most controversial and misunderstood phenomenon in the entirety of modern American history. And upon the testimonies of these children, as I said, mainstream narrative immediately flips surrounding this topic, and it describes the Satanic Panic as basically mass hysteria, irrational Christian paranoia, conspiracy thinking, false memories, which will become not an official psychological diagnosis, but will become so normalized in American culture that they perceive it as a foundational psychological diagnosis of false memory syndrome. And the Satanic Panic gets immediately equated from the normie mainstream media side as another Salem witch trial. You see, America already has a history of worrying about the satanic. And so the biggest propaganda move was immediately to equate this with hysteria of the Puritans in Massachusetts during the Salem witch trials. And that this is basically a Salem witch trial 2.0, and that we as Americans need to get over our bigotry and our presuppositions about the way the world should be, or in American culture, or what spirituality is, and realize that in 1980, the world's changed. The 1960s counterculture has already flipped American society. And we're going to get into why the 1960s in my document. I mean, this is a totally transitional point in American history. We really don't appreciate what the counterculture did. Now, we're talking about sexual liberation. We're talking about psychedelic drugs. We're talking about Eastern mysticism. We're talking about an anti-Christian sentimentality. We're talking about anti-patriarchy, anti-authority. All these things become normalized during the 1960s for the very first time. And it literally sets the stage for the rise of Satanism as a further transgression of American boundaries. I mean, in the 1960s, any public display of Satanism was absolutely on the fringe. Any mocking of Christ, like explicit blasphemy, inverted crosses, you wouldn't have found it in the 1960s. Now, obviously, the counterculture is a degradation and a dissolution of all the kind of WASP, conservative Protestant boundaries that America had formed since its foundation, really since being British colonies. And so we have to realize that in the American context, after the 1960s counterculture, American culture was no longer essentially a Christian culture. It totally fractures what I often refer to as the sacred canopy, right? The thing that unites us as Americans, our shared mythos, our shared stories, our shared heroes, our shared identity. There isn't one after the 1960s. And you see a response to this in the 1970s with what's called the Jesus People, where it's sort of a Protestant evangelical return back to Christ. We have to incorporate, honestly, many of the hippie elements. The Jesus People movement was very much a progressive movement that wanted to incorporate Christianity, as opposed to the counterculture that was tend to be explicitly opposed, incorporate Christianity into a more liberalized world. We see this with Jim Jones in Jonestown, how he, as the white pastor, was there to save black Americans and their historical oppression. And during the Jesus People movement, a uniquely American phenomenon was part of it. Why is evangelical Christianity so central to American history, American identity now? Well, it's uniquely American. How is that the case? Well, if you were with me when I did streams on Jonathan Edwards and the Puritans, we talked a little bit about the first and second Great Awakening. And we talked a little bit about this scandal that Jonathan Edwards, his father, who was a Puritan pastor as well, was very liberal with, quote unquote, the Eucharist. Again, it wasn't a full Eucharist, but they did have a sort of symbolic communion. This upsetted Jonathan Edwards because for the Puritan community at that time, you were supposed to be fully embedded into the community. You had to have some type of conversion experience. That place, that moment in which the indwelling of the Holy Spirit arrived in you. And you may have been brought into the church. You may have been part of the community, but did you have your confessional moment? Did you have that mystical encounter? And if you didn't, you really weren't a full member of the church. And so when we get to the Second Great Awakening with the tent revivals, where really the foundation of American evangelical Christianity is it gave people the opportunity to go to a tent revival filled with charismatic, emotive Christianity and get caught up in it. Pentecostalism, evangelical Christianity, all is coming out of this point in history. And it allowed people to have these conversion moments. And even during the Jesus People of the 1970s, you see this return to it with testimony. That the more debaucherous your testimony is, that maybe you were a prostitute or you were a drug addict, but now you're a born-again Christian, that gave you prestige and status within these communities. Whereas if you were just a good old boy, you were born into a Protestant family, you really never left the faith, never really had a wandering experience where you dabbled in the occult or, debaucherous sin or something like that, you don't really have a great testimony, right? And so it validates, and that's still true in American culture. People want to celebrate these immense testimony experiences. And I bring all that up because American Christianity, evangelical, Protestantism, is very much an emotive faith. And it's really the Jesus People that give you modern day rock band worship. That's where all that stuff gets incorporated into Christianity. My only point is connecting the tradition of these charismatic conversions, of an ecstatic experience, justifying your Protestant faith because they don't have sacraments, they don't have tradition, they don't have historicity on their side. So what they have is my subjective experience validates that I'm truly part of the community, that I'm saved. And that was part of the Jesus People movement in the 70s. Now, regarding the Satanic Panic, as I said, the mainstream narrative immediately switched to religious people invent imaginary demons. That this is the problem with Protestant Christians, is that they're losing their nation, right? The counterculture was explicitly in opposition to Protestant Christianity. By the 1980s, through the 1970s with disco and all this different stuff, culture has changed. Protestant Christianity and the power that it once felt and the hegemonic status it once had in American culture no longer exist. And so what happens is people become psychologically and politically framed as having a distrust toward hidden institutions as being irrational. Right? If you distrust the institutions, that's irrational. Hidden abuse networks are impossible. This is the mainstream media narrative that emerges in the late 1980s. Ritualized evil doesn't exist. This is a fantasy conjured up by the Christians of America. And any concern for evil or satanic rituals is evidence that you yourself are paranoid. And this becomes submitted in American culture. The idea is there's no abuse, there's no corruption, there's no exploitation of children. These children are making all this stuff up. And so I want to be clear here. I'm not arguing that everything that happened in the 1980s or the allegations were true. There weren't. There were instances of children being, given ideas and concepts or being shown images in which they claimed an adult man usually did something to them, and turned out that wasn't the case. One instance was a girl who had trauma, and she was convinced by another adult, a therapist, that her father had sexually abused her and that he had taken her to these satanic rituals. Turns out he hadn't. But again, once those allegations are made public, it's hard to really turn back time. So there were false allegations during the Satanic Panic. But what American culture, the narrative wants you to believe is that it was all hysteria. There was no substance behind it. I'm going to show you today in my document multiple cases during the 1980s that are established, right? This isn't a question. This isn't the McMartin preschool. This isn't the Franklin scandal. These are established cases of satanic ritual abuse. I have 7 of them. So the idea that none of this stuff was occurring, which is if you watch any video on YouTube talking about this, they're going to make fun of Christians that believed that there is real satanic cults participating in debaucherous rituals. But we have to, and also thinking about the 1960s, think of Charles Manson. Think of Jonestown in the 1970s. Think all this stuff. Think of Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, The Omen. These movies, the first one I believe is it Rosemary's Baby, is 1969. I'll have to check the dates. But those movies themselves were established late 60s, 69, and then through the 70s. For the first time, Hollywood actually depicts Satanism visually for the first time, which obviously is going to influence American culture. And so by the 1990s, organizations like the False Memory Foundation began arguing that recovered memories were always false. That children, or even children that grow up and become teenagers or adults that claim that they were abused, that they have these memories, that they can describe specific places and scenarios, all of it is false. And that therapists who help people deal with their trauma, be that they were schizophrenic or they had immense paranoia or any type of mental condition, that these were implanted by the therapists themselves. And that ritual abuse claims were socially constructed. That the entire Satanic Panic was a mass delusion. And so think about today where we have Jeffrey Epstein. Can anyone seriously argue that elite abuse networks are impossible now? But don't you see how American culture is so reluctant to actually prosecute anyone? And that's the thing that's going to connect it today. When we talk about the Franklin scandal in particular, or we look at Jeffrey Epstein today, what are one of the commonalities? That the government knew about it the entire time and aided and abetted in covering it up. So something that happened in the 80s and something that has happened in the 2020s or the 21st century, early 2000s, notice that it's the same pattern. The Franklin scandal and the Jeffrey Epstein stuff is the exact same pattern. And so suddenly the public, and now 2026, has been confronted with the reality that we have institutional protection of pedos, that there's intelligence connections to these satanic operations, of which the Finders are one of them. Are you guys familiar with who the Finders are? A cult, 1987. They basically went about trying to procure children. And that case, again, established in 1987, came about because 2 well-dressed men from Washington, D.C., get pulled over and arrested in a van who have 6 children in the back, who are malnourished, who are filthy, who have diseases, who are hungry, covered in insect bites. And they begin trying to figure out what's going on here. They ask the kids, where are your parents? They keep saying that they're on a mission and that they are now choosing to live without their parents. These are children. And then they uncover photos of children participating in ritual disembowelment of goats. covered, wearing like white linen and then participating in the disembowelment of goats. Jars of urine and feces they covered at this place. And this was in Tallahassee, Florida, by the way. So this is in Tallahassee, Florida, where the finders, nude photos of children all over the place. Evidence of an international travel, as if this was a global phenomenon. And it turn out? Nobody gets prosecuted. That the man who is in charge of it and his wife are both working for the CIA. And turns out, as Ted Gunderson highlights, which we're going to see today, that the finders was explicitly a CIA cutout. And they were procuring children. They were doing ritual abuse. They were participating in satanic rituals explicitly. And we don't know if this operation is still going or not. So, allows you to see that whether it be the false memory syndrome, whether it be the narrative that these kids are making things up, that the parents are crazy Christians and planting these memories or these thoughts into their children, it's all part of a grand narrative in which the United States government has been aiding and abetting literal Satanism and satanic ritual abuse. So tonight's stream is not going to be every conspiracy from the 1980s was true. That's not what we're trying to do here. Honestly, that's not even serious history. But what we are trying to examine is that what was the satanic panic actually? And what I think it was, and what I plan on demonstrating to you in the rest of the stream, is that it began with uncovering real satanic networks that the American population had no idea existed, and really boggled the mind that people could even participate in such stuff. We're talking about cannibalism of children. We're talking about eating feces. We're talking about ritual sacrifice. We're talking about networks, pedo networks across the entire nation, including the most prominent people of the U.S. government and military. How the 1960s counterculture set the stage for it. You see, there is no satanic panic if there was no counterculture. The transgression of American boundaries or traditional conservative boundaries was necessary for the metal bands, punk metal, black metal, heavy metal, explicit satanic imagery. It's in 1966 that Anton LaVey establishes the Church of Satan. For the first time ever in American history, there was no explicit religious orientation towards Satanism until LaVey. Now, I get it. Atheism, whether it's just symbolic, the Church of Satan technically isn't a theistic satanic church. I get it. But from the satanic panic, from the perspective of people living in the 70s and 80s, and they really don't care whether the Church of Satan believes in a theistic devil, because the ideas, the symbolism itself is corrosive to the mind, to the children, to the youth. And so my goal is to show to you guys that real occult criminality existed and still exists, which I shouldn't have difficulty convincing you guys of that. And we're going to try to uncover what exactly happened in the McMartin and the Franklin scandal. We're going to be talking about how false memory movement reframed the entire debate about the satanic panic and basically has left everyone since the late 1980s as basic. If you believe that there was satanic ritual abuse, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're paranoid, you're someone who should not be taken seriously. And then the last goal here is whether modern society overcorrected in dismissing the possibility of organized, ritualized evil altogether, which I argue that they did. That part of the propaganda narrative of the late 1980s and 1990s was to convince Americans that there is no such thing as evil satanic networks. These people do not form organizations. Elite people of power don't participate in these debaucherous rituals. And I think for the average American, the average normie brain is still operating under that presupposition. And with the Epstein case, I think what we're seeing is the people that are waking up to the reality that, oh my gosh, if Epstein is real, which we know is the case, man, maybe that Franklin scandal, maybe that McMartin preschool scandal, maybe all that stuff was real as well. So Smash that like, guys. That's what we're going to be diving into today. Major appreciation to everyone here. A shout out to the Repose app. Shout out to the Repose app becoming a Codal Crew member. Mr. Fist throws in 10, says, oy vey, not the tunnels. Yes, the tunnels. We'll be getting into the tunnels today. And the Repose app throws in 10, says, tough topic. Have to make sure to say my prayers afterwards. Thank you for your work nonetheless. Well, thank you very much, the Repose app, for the support. Do appreciate it. Our goal today is to hit 30 super chats here on YouTube. And if you guys would like to support or you have a question, feel free to use Streamlabs or Dono Chat. They take a little bit less. And a reminder that I'm uploading a bunch of members-only videos. So if anybody's feeling a little bit generous out there, please give some Codal Crew memberships, as I'm going to continue to upload clips from videos that will be members-only. Steve throws in 10 over on Streamlabs, says, Rosemary's Baby was 1968, and the first Satanic movie with a story involving a baby or child. The very first time that Hollywood produced a Satanic-themed movie was from 1943, entitled The Seventh Victim. It involved a secret cult and missing woman. But Rosemary's Baby, Steve, to your point, isn't that the first time where it's like a mass Hollywood successful film, though? Rosemary Baby was much more successful than the one you mentioned in 1943, The Seventh Victim. At least that's what, when I was reading about the Satanic Panic, Rosemary's Baby, 1968-69, was mentioned multiple times of people concerned with the shifting of American norms. So, but you make a great point. It isn't until the late 60s, so after the counterculture, in which they can even make a film like that with a child that becomes a mass Hollywood hit. And of course, right following that, the early 70s, I think, is The Exorcist, and then after that is The Omen. So Hollywood has absolutely aided, and that's why, think about it today, the Lady Gaga concerts, or Beyonce, or even Taylor Swift. Why do they have all this occult symbolism? It's almost like the whole goal is to convince you that evil doesn't exist, and then constantly put satanic evil symbolism and imagery in front of you. So that it's almost like predictive programming, like it almost gets into your subconscious and affects you. So shout out to Rui for throwing 10 for a super chat. No comment. Thank you very much, brother. I do appreciate that. So first thing that I'm going to show you guys is a video that I found from 1985. This was sent to me by Paisios. Okay, so this is the first one. These are actually really hard to find. News segments from the time of the Satanic Panic. Again, if you go on YouTube and search Satanic Panic, the vast majority of stuff is claiming that oh my God, they hated Dungeons and Dragons, or any ABC, 60 Minutes News, whatever, they're going to tell you this is hysteria, this wasn't real. But this is a segment before the False Memory Syndrome Foundation began to reorient the narrative about these children being essentially deceived by their parents and therapists. So this is a real news clip from 1985.
It's bizarre and hard to prove. Yet the tales that were told to us in interviews conducted across the country were later verified by authorities, who say there are consistent telltale clues. And they provide a checklist of 6 satanic practices to look for. For example, being placed inside a coffin. It's an experience that many children are describing.
Well, the adults would dig up the caskets from the graveyards, and all the members, including the children, were made to lay in the remains of whatever was in the casket.
Get in a casket with a decomposed body?
Right, and then the casket was closed, and they would be lowered into the ground while they were in the casket.
The author of a popular book on Satanism, Dr. Lawrence Pastor.
Children are involved in graveyards and crematoria.
Okay, so who this guy? Dr. Lawrence Pastor. Why is he significant? He is the author of a book that is commonly referred to as the beginning of the Satanic Panic. It was titled Michelle Remembers. And what it was about is him, a psychiatrist, working with a woman named Michelle, who is now an adult, and him aiding her through various therapies to uncover trauma, which she identified as satanic ritual abuse, that she was present at various satanic rituals, she was sexually abused, all this different stuff. And this was kind of the first article in mass media that really put forth this idea that there's satanic networks across the world. And this is in Canada. So she was arguing that there was a coven or satanic cult somewhere around British Columbia. I think it was Vancouver. But, Jay says, I've read, it's goofy as hell. It was a psyop. Well, he came out later and actually recanted the book and made claims that there was other reasons why she may have come up with some of the scenarios in which she described. But that's who this gentleman is. He's the author of the book Michelle Remembers.
In funeral parlors, because one of the primary focuses of these people is death. Everything is attempted to be destroyed and killed in that child and in society, everything of goodness. And death is a major preoccupation.
Another indicator, satanic paraphernalia. In every case, the children talk about precisely the same setting.
They described a satanic goat's head being on the wall over the table. They described a lot of candles. And they described people in black and white robes with hoods.
The hood, Mike, what's this for?
This is to create for whoever's practicing a magical atmosphere.
The colors mean anything?
Yeah, the red ones would be used for some types of sexual rituals, people who are doing sexual magic. This would be used for ordinary ceremonies and also for ceremonies where you'd be throwing a curse on somebody.
Another indicator, kidnapping. In almost every case, the children have talked about children who were snatched and later sacrificed.
They were taught to aid in the kidnapping of children. What they would do is the kids would go and play with the children and then tell them that they were either going to go to a party or that there was some toys or whatever and get them so they weren't on the move, and then her father and other members would grab the kids.
Do you find missing children sometimes fall prey to these people?
I believe that they do. We can't prove that they do. But as a law enforcement officer, I question 2 million children missing in the United States, knowing that many, many of those are not runaways and are so young that they couldn't run away anyway.
Number 4, sexual abuse aimed at destroying faith in God. It's being described by numerous children.
What were the parallels with what the boys have told you and the worship of Satan?
Well, first of all, the sexual abuse, the pornography, which always seems to go hand in hand. The boys talked about how these people actually said, I hate God, and they used a very deep voice when they talked about that.
Yeah, Jay makes a good point here. He says the creation of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was a CIA, was founded by a CIA creep. We're going to be talking about one of those gentlemen right here, Ralph Underwager, who he himself was a founding member of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And we'll check a little section of this interview he did with Paideia, the Journal on Pedophilia, an academic journal, in which he argues that it is God's will. Yes, I'm not kidding. He actually says this. You can see it right here. He says, I believe this is in fact part of God's will. They have the right to make these statements for themselves as personal choices, talking about what I think that pedophiles can make the assertion that the pursuit of intimacy and love is what they choose. With boldness, they can say, I believe this is in fact part of God's will. And so to Jay's point, so much of the people that were part of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation were themselves pedos, like multiple people. And that's why Ralph Wager here, Underwager that we'll be looking at, he goes out of his way to defend some of the most heinous pedos. There's a case specifically about Mr. Bubbles in Australia we're going to watch a little clip of, where they literally tried to discredit children or victims and really go at the defense and prop up these pedos, that there's so much substantial evidence, but much of it or at least the testimonies of children, are totally dismissed. So the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, filled with pedos. Look up Martin Orney. I haven't looked him up, so let me pull this up real quick. Michael Orney. False Memory Syndrome Foundation. If you have stuff, I'll definitely be interested in looking that up. I've not seen anything right now, Jay. Anyways, thanks for the comments, because that totally coincides with what I feel like I've uncovered in prepping for this stream.
One of the primary aims is to destroy the belief system within a child, to make the child turn against what they believe in terms of who they are, of who God is, and to desecrate all manner of flesh, all manner of church institution, all manner of sign and symbol that a child could in any way be attached to.
Cannibalism. It's difficult to believe, but in every case we examined, children described it.
The hearts were cut out, and the children were made to chew pieces of these children's hearts, pieces of their flesh.
Is cannibalism part of the ritual?
The children have spoken about this in almost every instance. Also, human feces, or drinking the urine, or drinking human blood.
That's part of the ritual.
Right.
I have an old 3-inch scar here on my wrist where my friends used to cut my arm open and bleed my blood into a cup and drink it mixed with wine and urine 4 times a year as a ceremony to Satan.
And finally...
And remember, I told you that there was a transgender Satanist when I was in my coursework for my PhD in Berkeley, that there was a girl who went by the name Johnny who claimed to be a lesbian, although she demanded to be identified as a man who had a girlfriend. And she was a priestess of a satanic coven there in the Bay Area that were predominantly LGBTQ. No surprise, she's trans. But in regards to the gentleman that just said that they would drain his blood and mix it with urine and feces, in the class, Johnny, this transgender satanic priestess, admitted that one of the rituals that they've done at her temple is to utilize menstrual blood, urine, and fecal matter on a wafer, essentially a inverted form of the Catholic Eucharist, in sort of sacramental ritualistic purposes. She said during class that the violation of these taboos empowers them within their spiritual tradition. So you think that that's like made up, right? That they'll consume urine or fecal matter or menstrual blood? No. People are still doing this today. Like there's literally, I met a trans girl trying to go to graduate school, running a satanic coven, theistic, by the way. This is not Church of Satan, LaVey stuff. This is theistic Satanism. She talked about conjuring demons and all this different stuff in class, and talked about, with her girlfriend there, what it is they do when they consume the inverted Eucharist that they're a part of. So that is real. That is not just scandalous.
Cremation. Most of the children describe witnessing it. It might explain why no bodies have been found. So far, police have failed to make the connection, as in the case of yet another youngster who, with his mother's consent, described how bodies were disposed of.
He would take the bodies and put a trash bag over the feet and head. He'd put it, and then what he would do is he had his car parked out back. So they took them to the funeral home, and they were cremated, and nobody ever knew anything about the bodies.
These people cover their tracks very well. When they dispose of a body, they use that body as well. They will use, as I said, they will cremate that body. They will use the ashes that will become part of what they will continue to present to that particular group, and they will disperse that. They're not going to do some simple murder and leave a body in a stream for you to pick up the pieces of.
6 clues that point to the illegal worship of Satan, each based on the testimony of children, and none of it has ever been proved.
The problem that exists is we're getting the stories, but we don't have the victims. Once it's proven with one case, it's going to add more credibility to each one of the other cases.
Until that one case is proved, the link between crime and satanic cults will remain speculative. The victims in this report did break the grip of Satanism, but each is left with permanent scars, and experts say they were lucky to escape.
When you get into one of these groups, there's only a couple ways you can get out. One is death. The other is mental institutions. Or the third, you can't get out.
And as we'll see in some of the psychological documents that Paisio sent me for today's stream, one of the authors talks about how schizophrenia, extreme paranoia, a lot of mental illnesses are all symptomatic of someone who experienced satanic ritual abuse. And that's what makes it so difficult, is that secular psychology has no room for talking about the spiritual, the mystical, the demonic. And so no matter what one experiences, they're going to be medicated as if there's a mental problem that they were like born with or something, as opposed to actually listening to or dealing with what may be the actual traumatic abuse. Jay sent in 10, he said, Martin Orney. Okay, let me pull that up. I just pulled it up on the other tab. So Michael Orney was another co-founder, wife of Emily Orney. Key founder was established in 1992. Orney, a professor of psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania. Orney's involvement in FMSF is frequently cited in critical analysis due to his history of conducting hypnosis research funded by the CIA as part of the MK Ultra program during the 50s and 60s. Critics argue that his background in mind control experimentation and his role in promoting the concept of false memory syndrome served to discredit victims of abuse and support legal defenses of accused pedophiles. Despite these controversies, Orney remained a significant influence on the organization until his death, with the FMSF positioning itself as a defense against allegedly abusive therapeutic techniques that induced false memories. Yes. And just think about all the scandals that we have and how many people have gone to jail. How many people went to jail for Jimmy Savile? What about the Catholic pedo scandals? I mean, Jerry Sandusky in Penn State, he's one that actually went to jail. What about the Boy Scouts? All the pedophilia accusations within the Boy Scouts. And, of course, Jeffrey Epstein. These are just a handful in recent years. And notice that it doesn't seem like the government or the legal system is too interested in going after these people. Strange. Shout out to Wicked Wally. He throws in 5, says, you know I'm going to come in with slow shade at all the evangelicals who only hurt Christianity, demonizing heavy metal and miscredited hate over this. Yeah. Hey, shout out to you, Wally. God bless you. Boomer Slayer throws in 20, says, Michelle remembers happened where I live. Definitely odd things going on as well as psyops. I remember growing up, my mom telling me not to talk to strangers because they could be Satanists. Oh, that's interesting. So Boomer Slayer is up in Canada. Interesting. MF Zod throws in 25, says, hi, DPH, Inquirer here. Excited for my journey. Got your book in me. Oh, glory to God. Thank you, brother. Going to dive in tomorrow. You, Jay Dyer, Jim Bob, great work. God bless. Well, thank you very much, brother. Really appreciate the support. Hope you enjoy the book. Thank you very much for purchasing a copy. Really means a lot. And Disgruntled Docs throws in $2, says the Novo Ordo does the scat mass. The scat mass. Yeah, that's true. Okay, so one of the things we can't get into, this is a video from 60 Minutes Australia. I told you Paisio sent me this, but we can't watch it. It's going to get copy struck immediately. And here's the two documents that, these psychology documents that Paisio sent me. This was The Politics of False Memory, Controversy, the Making of an Academic Urban Legend by Karl Raschke. I'm going to go over the importance of that document. We're not going to read through the whole thing, of course. And then this is Guidelines to Differential Diagnosis Between Schizophrenia and Ritual Abuse / Mind Control Traumatic Stress. And I'm going to summarize this document for you as well. And then we'll get back into some of the videos. So let's jump into the document real quick. Smash that like. And I just want to go over, make sure everybody has a full understanding of the details of everything before we watch more videos and stuff. And I'm going to be skipping through a lot of my documents. So if you guys want the full thing, go join the Logos Academy, school.com/Logos Academy. It's only for men. But if you are a man, you can join. All of my show notes, everyone I've created is up and available there. So we've already kind of mentioned, I'm not going to go into it too much, the 1960s counterculture, setting the stage for what became the Satanic Panic. Again, before the counterculture, America was overwhelmingly filled with Christian symbolism. The nuclear family was important. There was still an understanding of sexual restraint and modesty. Institutional authority was strong, patriotism, and the expectation of moral conformity. Now, once the 1960s counterculture begins, we see anti-authoritarianism, psychedelic experimentation, covered that many times, sexual liberation, radical individualism, anti-war activism, feminist rebellion, Eastern spirituality, and rejection of bourgeois Christianity. So Christianity becomes seen as repressive, patriarchal, social conformity, and institutional control that must be dealt with and opposed, leading to transgression as spiritual liberation, right? To transgress the boundaries of conservative Christianity, I mean, in America, it's Protestantism, was seen as the new form of individual liberation. So the rise of public Satanism. So there is no development of public Satanism until the late 1960s. I said 66 is Anton LaVey. Yes, I get it. Atheistic, more symbolism than theistic. Yes. I get all of it. But it presents Satan as a theological enemy within Christianity, a cultural symbol of rebellion, egoism as something good, sensuality, elitism, anti-Christian inversion, and ritual transgression. So for the first time in modern American history, satanic identity became public. Ritual inversion became performative, and anti-Christian symbolism entered popular culture openly. Then we get, as I mentioned, Hollywood and the commercialization of evil. Rosemary Baby, 1968. The Exorcist, 1973. The Omen, 1976. First time truly introducing demonic possession through Hollywood, satanic conspiracy, occult ritual, and anti-Christian evil into mainstream entertainment. By the late 1970s, occult symbolism had become commercially marketable. Many Americans increasingly felt evil itself was becoming aesthetic in many ways. The sexual revolution, moral destabilization. American society experienced normalization of pornography during the 70s, weakening of sexual taboos, the rise of divorce, public eroticism, experimentation with alternative lifestyles, and increasing collapse of traditional family structure. The Satanic Panic later fused fear of occultism, fear of pornography, right? We still hear that today, that about, the no fap movement, or people talking about men's issues and the problem of masturbating to pornography regularly and how it is a sin and a temptation for many men, that you're a Luddite, you're backwards. Don't you know that watching porn and masturbating, it's good for you, it's healthy. All that stuff, those ideas and mentalities get established in the 1970s. Fear of hidden abuse, fear of child exploitation, and fear of spiritual corruption are all demonized through the Satanic Panic. So cult violence, 1970s also saw the rise of highly visible cults. Charles Manson, obviously, Jonestown, 1978, we mentioned that. These cases demonstrated charismatic leaders could psychologically dominate followers. Hidden communities could become violent, and a cult ideology could produce ritualized murder. Now, I'm not going to dwell on Manson too long, but there's really good research on how he was basically an MK Ultra subject and working with the CIA, working with the intelligence agencies, and they knew what he was up to before the murders. Okay? So notice the commonality here, that the CIA and the U.S. government seems to be involved in everything, just like we saw with Michael Orney that Jay shared. He was literally working with the CIA and MK Ultra. We see it in the Franklin scandal. We see it in the Jeffrey Epstein scandal. So, heavy metal, this is where Wicked Wally gets a little upset. Heavy metal does become demonized. And let's just face it, it's not the music itself that is bad, but there were metal bands that were openly satanic. And so by the late 1970s and especially the 1980s, heavy metal increasingly embraced satanic imagery, anti-Christian symbolism, occult references, ritual aesthetics, death imagery, and symbolic inversion. Album covers depicted pentagrams, inverted crosses, blasphemous themes, and demonic imagery. In Scandinavia during the 1980s and 1990s, they saw church burnings, anti-Christian extremism, ritual aesthetics, and explicit satanic rhetoric. So, eventually, as we already mentioned, some of the abuse begins to be uncovered at the end of the 70s and the early 1980s. Thus, Americans increasingly believe terrible forms of evil had already been hidden beneath respectable institutions for decades. This made fears of organized ritual abuse psychologically plausible to the normal American. And then you get the emergence of the Satanic Panic. By the early of the 1980s, several historical streams converged simultaneously. Collapse of traditional Christian moral authority, we mentioned, and that really took place in the 60s. Mainstream visibility of satanic symbolism, again, first established in 66 with LaVey. Real cult violence found in the 70s and early 80s. Ritualized criminal cases, occult fascination and entertainment, growing awareness of child abuse, and distrust of institutions. However, dismissing the entire phenomenon as mere delusion ignores the broader historical reality. Real occult criminality existed, I'm going to show you cases that were proven during this time. Real ritualized violence, real cult abuse, and anti-Christian transgressive culture had become increasingly visible, if not normalized, by the end of the 80s. Now, here are some examples of real cases that you probably haven't heard of that all occurred during this time that after the conviction state that it was tied with satanic ritual abuse. First one, the River Falls satanic cult murders, Massachusetts, 1979 through 1980. One of the strongest American examples connecting alleged satanic cult activity to real homicide investigations, multiple murderers, courtroom testimony regarding satanic ritual meetings and convictions gave the case enormous significance during the rise of public concern over occult violence. Relationship to satanic activity. Witnesses describe satanic rituals, occult ceremonies, ritualized sexual activity, and cult gatherings. Important facts, we'll skip the details. If you want all this stuff, the document's available at the Logos Academy. Multiple women were murdered in River Falls, Massachusetts. Investigators uncovered testimony alleging ritual meetings, occult symbolism. Carl Drew and Robin Murphy were convicted in the Karen Marsden murder. Andy Malatis was convicted in the Barbara Raposa killing. The case later became controversial, with some arguing investigators exaggerated the satanic elements. But it demonstrates that ritual occult activity, cult organization, Satanism, all existed and contributed to these crimes. Case study number 2, the Chicago Ripper Crew, 1981 through 1982. Highly organized group of sexual sadists who abducted, tortured, mutilated, and murdered women in Chicago. The group reportedly incorporated satanic themes, ritual behavior, and cult-like practices in their crimes. Confessions and investigations describe satanic rituals, ceremonial mutilation, ritual gatherings, and cultic hierarchy. The group reportedly mainstreamed a satanic chapel. Body parts were allegedly treated as ritual objects. Victims were abducted, sexually tortured, mutilated, and then murdered. Female breasts were removed from victims. Investigators described ritualized treatment of body parts. The crimes involved extreme sadism and cult-like group dynamics. Several members were convicted of murders and violent crimes. Case number 3, Ricky Casso, the Acid King, New York, 1984. A teenage murderer whose obsession with Satanism, occultism, drugs, and grave desecration became one of the defining symbolic cases of the Satanic Panic era. Casso, excuse me, openly embraced satanic imagery, occult practices, grave robbing, and anti-Christian symbolism. Witnesses claimed he shouted, "Say you love Satan," during the murders. And then important facts. Lawers was lured into the woods and murdered. Casso heavily used LSD and other drugs. Casso was associated with occult and satanic fascination. Media coverage emphasized ritualistic aspects, satanic identity, and youth occult subculture. Case study number 4, Sean Sellers. Oklahoma, 1985 through 1986. A teenage murderer who openly identified with Satanism and linked occult beliefs to multiple killings. Aha, so he publicly discussed Satanism, demonic influence, occult beliefs, and spiritual darkness. His crimes became heavily associated with fears of satanic youth culture. Sellers murdered a convenience store clerk, his own mother, and his stepfather. He was convicted of 3 murders. Later publicly embraced Christianity while on death row. The case became nationally known due to satanic themes, occult identity, and youth violence. Case study number 5, the Elise Pollard murder, California, 1995. A ritualized teenage murderer framed explicitly as a satanic sacrifice intended to benefit a death metal band. Perpetrators described the killing as a sacrifice connected to satanic themes. Pollard was lured to a remote location, stabbed repeatedly, and murdered. Investigators concluded the killing involved sacrificial thinking, occult themes, and ritualized violence. All 3 perpetrators received lengthy prison sentences. Case 6, the Matamoros Mark Kilroy murder, Texas-Mexico border, 1989. Perhaps the strongest documented North American example of organized occult ritual murder connected to a criminal cult. Although technically rooted in syncretic occult traditions rather than pure LaVeyan Satanism, the group practiced ritual sacrifice, conducted occult ceremonies, used ritual objects, and committed human sacrifice. They were called narco-Satanists. Kilroy was kidnapped, tortured, and ritually murdered. Authorities discovered ritual cauldrons, human remains, occult shrines, sacrificial materials, and multiple mutilated bodies. The cult blended occult ritual, drug trafficking, violence, and human sacrifice. Now, who has been the largest drug trafficker in modern American history? Is it not the CIA? Is it not the CIA? Doesn't it seem like the CIA seems to show up everywhere regarding this Satanism stuff? Case study 7. Law enforcement recognition of occult and ritual crime. Even skeptical federal investigators acknowledged that occult-themed crime existed, while disputing claims of massive hidden nationwide conspiracies. So, now the last thing I want to share with you guys in my study guide here has to do with how they convinced the American public that the children talking about satanic ritual abuse were actually manipulated and were filled with false memories, creating a new standard and then a foundation called false memory syndrome. So let me explain a little bit of how this all came about and totally shifted the perception of the Satanic Panic. So one of the central developments of the 1990s was the rise of the argument that many claims involving, satanic ritual abuse and all this stuff were actually the result of therapist suggestion, memory distortion, confabulation, and socially constructed narratives. The backlash became strongly associated with false memory syndrome foundation, where critics claimed therapists were unintentionally implanting false abuse memories into vulnerable patients. So the mainstream skeptical position is that memory is reconstructive. They argued rather than photographic, so that the memory and what these children think they saw is all being constructed in real time, and that is what they keep referring back to. Traumatic memories can be distorted. Hypnosis-guided imagery are unreliable. And some therapists increasingly assumed hidden abuse before evidence existed. Now, the major problems with this backlash and trying to essentially discredit the child victims, that while legitimate concerns existed regarding suggestive therapy, as I said, that is true. That's why this topic is difficult. It's nuanced. Is that there was suggestive therapy, contaminated testimony, and prosecutorial overreach. That was true. The backlash increasingly evolved beyond scientific caution into broad cultural dismissal. The movement portrayed survivors as delusional, therapists as manipulative, and ritual abuse narratives as inherently irrational. And so the central issue, the deeper question was not merely can memory be distorted, of course, but whether skepticism toward hysteria and conspiracy theory gradually transformed into an inability to acknowledge the possibility of organized, ritualized abuse and hidden forms of evil altogether. They basically ignored all of it. And so one of the documents, the first one that I was showing you guys that Paisio sent me, was Carl Raschke and the critique of the false memory syndrome. And so this is me breaking down his document into the main arguments. False memory syndrome became an ideological framework used to delegitimize victims of ritual abuse and recovered trauma memories. The author claims false memory syndrome was never formally recognized as a psychiatric disorder, despite what most people believe. Most people and even psychologists talk as if it's already been formally recognized. It has not. Yet, it became culturally powerful through media, academia, and legal activism. He argues that false memory syndrome was never an official diagnosis. It lacked DSM recognition, it lacked standardized diagnostic criteria, and functioned more as a media and legal category than a legitimate psychiatric syndrome. Memory research was overextended. The argument is Luftus successfully demonstrated memory distortion, but critics improperly generalized this into trauma memories are broadly fabricated. The document emphasizes memory distortion does not automatically invalidate abuse testimony. Ritual abuse claims became publicly delegitimized, and that the phrase satanic panic became a cultural weapon. The document argues the term satanic panic was increasingly used to ridicule abuse allegations, discredit investigators, dismiss survivors, and portray concern over ritual abuse as a paranoid fantasy. Then he mentions the McMartin preschool scandal. His argument presented is mainstream culture prematurely dismissed the case. Children's testimony may have contained genuine substance, and later archaeological claims involving tunnels were ignored because public consensus had already been formed around the idea of mass hysteria. Think about that. The first claim of the McMartin preschool scandal begins in 1983. The police began to raid and investigate the preschool in 1985. I believe the case was going on through 1988 and 89, and by that time, once Ted Gunderson and the archaeologists discovered the tunnels under the McMartin preschool, the case was almost over. And the lawyers refused to admit it as evidence, despite the fact that it would justify and legitimate the claims that children said they were taken from the school through secret portals and holes in the walls into an underground tunnel where they were ritually abused. It was admitted. They would not admit it. Interesting. So, the final conclusion of the first document is that false memory movement evolved beyond scientific skepticism into a broader ideological backlash against ritual abuse claims, disassociation research, and survivor testimony. Now, the second document about schizophrenia and various mental health illnesses being tied with ritual abuse and MK Ultra, that's what this one talks about. So their central thesis, this was done by two authors, is that many individuals diagnosed with schizophrenia or psychosis are actually survivors of severe trauma, ritual abuse, and dissociative fragmentation, which I immediately, when I was reading, immediately began to think of all the transgenders, all the furries, all these people that have these weird sexual fetishes. Is that, look at the trans killers and all the latest school shootings. Look at the one that, Wisconsin, that shot up the Catholic school and actually shot one of the Orthodox girls in the head there, and she, glory to God, ended up surviving. Remember the depictions and the art that person was drawing, and how it showed them talking to a mirror, and in the mirror he was a devil, he was a demon essentially, and that he was writing like satanic demonic things in Russian, and according to his mother he didn't even know Russian. Do you remember that? That was like last year. So it makes you think that not only are these people possessed, but people who are exposed to satanic ritual abuse are way more susceptible to be a harbinger of demons. And I think that's what we see all over our culture today, right? And that psychology has tried to normalize mental illness when perhaps, according to this document, much of the mental illness we see is actually due to ritualized abuse. The author claims psychiatry frequently mistakes trauma symptoms for psychotic illness, especially in cases involving ritual abuse or organized coercive environments. Main arguments. Number one, this document strongly argues organized ritual abuse exists, cult-based abuse occurs, and many survivor narratives should not automatically be dismissed as fantasy or delusion. The authors also say severe trauma can produce extreme disassociation. They argue severe childhood trauma fragments consciousness, of which we know, right? MK Ultra, mind control. You have to shatter the ego, the sense of self. You must fracture it so that the person becomes malleable, leading to disassociation, identity fragmentation, hallucinations, internal voices, and bizarre psychological symptoms. Hallucinations are not unique to schizophrenia. The document argues abuse survivors frequently hear voices. Disassociation can resemble psychosis, and psychiatry often assumes bizarre experiences automatically indicate delusion. Trauma-based conditioning and ritual programming, one of the most controversial sections, argues organized abusers may use torture, ritual trauma, psychological conditioning, and symbolic manipulation to fragment victims psychologically. It discusses trauma-based conditioning, internal fragmentation, program triggers, and ritualized coercive systems. Psychiatry broadly dismisses extraordinary abuse narratives. The authors argue ritual abuse survivors are often labeled psychotic, schizophrenic, fantasy-prone, or delusional. Overall, the document argues severe trauma and ritual abuse can produce symptoms resembling schizophrenia, and psychiatry often misunderstands dissociative trauma survivors because extraordinary abuse narratives are prematurely dismissed as impossible or delusional. So, there we go. That's the whole document that I wanted to show you guys. Now we're going to get into a video talking about Ralph Underwager and how he, as a co-founder of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, was essential in getting a obvious pedo in Australia off the hook by basically doing everything he could to discredit the victims. So let's get into that next. All right. So we're going to pick up right here. But before we do, let's catch up with the chat here, see what you guys have to say. Akathis, Codal Crew member for 6 months. Thank you so much, brother. Josiah Elleron, Codal Crew member for 21 months, says, let's all give. Thank you very much, Josiah. Jess throws in 5, says, Apex, a recent movie with Charlize Theron, explores themes of beef jerky and cannibalism. Considering the emails, I don't think it's coincidence. Interesting. I am not aware of that movie, but that certainly sounds like the Epstein Files. A very generous dono, $50 comes in from Alan the Dinosaur. Thank you so much, Alan. He says, I remember when evangelicals called everything satanic, demonic, and coming for kids. They watered down these terms, so when people warned us about LG HD community and exploitative elites, no one listened. But this happened in the 80s too. No, you're absolutely right. And, you know, I get why people got, irritated with some of the more hysterical aspects of the satanic ban from some of the Protestants. But once you dive into it, and now I'm fully convinced. So after preparing for today's stream, I'm fully convinced of what happened at the Franklin scandal, the Franklin cover-up. I'm absolutely convinced that the McMartin School preschool case was legitimate satanic ritual abuse. But any mainstream narrative, any mainstream article is going to be dismissive of this stuff. And so I sympathize with all the parents, all the Protestants, the people that were calling out this stuff in the 80s. But you're right. Once the media and the government were successful in shifting the narrative and discrediting the victims and claiming all this stuff was hysteria and that the children were making it up, I think America did not recover from that until Epstein. I think Epstein, in the last few years, is the first time that the American mind as a collective, as a zeitgeist, as a culture, has kind of turned the corner on organized ritual abuse and realizing this stuff is not fantasy. It's absolutely real. So thank you so much, Alan, for that generous support. FB throws in 10, says, actually under Biden, the FBI spied on Catholics while the church gets uniquely demonized. Yet Hollywood, schools, and the Boy Scouts with their own scandals get a pass. That's a double standard. Well, I'll say, I'm not here to bash just on Catholics. I will say it's been problematic how they just move these priests around to different jurisdictions, or they'll take, someone from America and put them in Europe. I will say though, that it's funny, under Biden, the FBI spies on the Catholic Church, but yet Catholic priests communed Biden while he was president. So you're going to have to take that up with the Catholic Church. How does the Catholic Church, if Biden is using the FBI to spy on the Catholic Church and arresting, anti-abortion protesters, and yet he's able to go to a Catholic church and receive communion? Sounds like the problem is the church more so than Biden himself. But thank you so much, brother. I do appreciate the support. I think there's a double standard with all of it. The Tech Diva throws in 10, says, dang, bro, I would love to have a copy of these show notes, but it appears I'm not able to access the means in which you're sharing them. Is there no way for a woman to get them? I could potentially figure out a way in which women could pay a much smaller fee and get access to all the show notes, and maybe some of the courses. I'll look into that. I'll see if maybe I can do something where the show notes will be available for people to purchase. Okay. And let me just check the dono chat real quick, see if anybody's seen anything in. Thomas Henderson throws in a generous $50. Shout out to Thomas Henderson. Says, haven't sent you a super chat in a while. Here's to help you get to tonight's goal of super chats. Keep up the good work. Chat later. Thomas. Shout out to Thomas, one of my longest website members and members of the Logos Academy. I love you, my brother. Thank you so much for that generous support. Really appreciate it. And over on Streamlabs, let me just double check before we dive into the next video clip. All right. So next thing that I want to show you guys, this is a clip from a really interesting YouTube channel called Apollo's Artifacts. In fact, he even did a review of one of Jay Dyer's books. And he gets it. He definitely gets it. And so he's talking a little bit about this guy, Ralph Underwager, and it's going to lead into this video. I think it's 60 minutes from like the 80s, talking about how he got one of these pedos off trial in Australia. So check this out.
I don't think that a pedophile needs negatively let themselves be too much defined by other people. That is usually an essentially negative definition. Pedophiles spend a lot of time and energy defending their choice. I don't think that a pedophile needs to do that. Pedophiles can boldly and courageously affirm what they choose. They can say that what they want is to find the best way to love. I am also a theologian, and as a theologian, I believe it is God's will that there be closeness and intimacy, unity of the flesh between people. A pedophile can say, this closeness is possible for me within the choices that I've made. What about the child's choices? Interesting how that's left out. Pedophiles are too defensive. They go around saying, you people out there are saying that what I choose is bad, that it's no good. You're putting me in a prison. You're doing all these terrible things to me. I have to define my love as being in some way or other illicit. What I think is that pedophiles can make the assertion that the pursuit of intimacy and love is what they choose. With boldness, they can say, I believe this is in fact part of God's will. They have the right to make these statements for themselves as personal choices. Now, whether or not they can persuade other people that they are right is another matter, and he laughs. So here he is saying it's part of God's will.
So this is Ralph Underwager, a co-founder of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, with just this gentleman, Martin Orney, who, as Jay highlighted, is what did hypnosis research funded by the CIA as part of MK Ultra program. These are the two figures that found the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and you can see Ralph Underwager, Wagger, whatever his name is, literally justifying pedophilic thoughts, activities, and as a theologian, he was Lutheran, by the way. He had a PhD in seminary from a Lutheran institute. As a theologian, believes it's God's will that there be closeness and intimacy between adults and children. Yep.
That they abuse children and engage in pedophilia and pederastic rape, molestation, and child abuse. That, my friends, is the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and people who it sends around and has sent around for many, many decades has hired guns to all these different cases to be experts. And we'll go ahead and take a look here at Mr. Underwager's performance in the Mr. Bubbles case in Australia.
That a number of people, including some in high places, wanted to keep secret. The case against Mr. Bubbles. In that report, parents named Tony Derrin as the man who had sexually assaulted their children. Derrin's wife ran the kindergarten they attended. Tonight we investigate another crucial aspect of this disturbing case. You'll remember police listed 17 young victims, and more than 50 criminal charges were eventually laid. But when the Mr. Bubbles case went to court, not one of the children was called to give evidence. The charges were thrown out, and Tony Derrin was set free. One of the key Derrin witnesses was a hired gun from the United States, a psychologist named Ralph Underwager, who says he's an expert in child sexual abuse. He testified that the children's evidence had been contaminated and that they were too young to know what the truth was. But just what is Mr. Underwager's expertise? And how much respect does he command in American courts? We went there to find out. And we should warn that at times in this report, the language has to be quite explicit.
You're a bastard.
No, I'm not.
You're a bastard.
This is Ralph Underwager, psychologist. He was paid $25,000 and gave crucial evidence in favour of Tony Derrin. Evidence which helped Derrin walk free.
Your people can leave now. You go out the door now.
When we wanted to question Mr. Underwager about his involvement in the Bubbles case, the questions got too harsh.
You go out the door now.
But first, a reminder of the case against Mr. Bubbles.
Jocelyn said that they got undressed and that they got into a bathtub that was full of bubbles and that they played in the bathtub.
Did Mr. Bubbles ever get in the bath himself?
Yes, he did. She said that he got in without any clothes on.
They'd get undressed and get in the bath while he had a shower. He had a shower before he hopped in the bath with them.
Mr. Bubbles?
Yes.
Always the same story. 3- and 4-year-olds being lured into bubble baths with a man who sexually abused them.
Having examined them and talked with them, are you not convinced that those children were sexually abused?
Absolutely no doubt.
No doubt at all.
That's the evidence Professor Kim Oates wanted to give in court, but he was never asked. As head of the Child Protection Unit at the Camperdown Children's Hospital in Sydney, he's known around the world as an expert in detecting child sexual abuse. So we have 18 children who were examined, 5 of whom your staff say were definitely sexually abused, and all of them from the same preschool. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think if you look at the incidence of significant child sexual abuse in the community, significant enough to leave physical findings, in the preschool age group, I think is extraordinary.
This is Jocelyn's medical report from the Children's Hospital, and it's very clear. There had been trauma specifically directed at the genitalia.
You can't let people walk around scot-free abusing children.
As the word spread, more and more children were taken to the local police station after initial questioning by their distraught parents. Questions which brought bizarre answers and led police here. The kindergarten the children attended, Sea Beach Kindergarten. The children told parents and police how they were taken from here for parties, special parties, hosted by Mr. Bubbles.
Do you know Mr. Bubbles?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to skip some of this. This is the children describing the incident. It's hard to listen to, but we'll skip to where they find the guy. This is Mr. Bubbles. This is the adult man who's running a preschool, who's creating bubble baths for 3 to 4 to 5-year-old children, and then getting naked, touching them, doing things in the bathtub. It's this guy right here.
Is that the man that Jocelyn identified?
Yes, it is. It's Mr. Bubbles.
And it's also
Anthony Darren.
The police constable showed the photos again and she said, yes, there's the bubble man to that particular.
This is Barocco Courthouse, Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. In 1972, Derham was brought here, charged with the aggravated assault of 2 young girls. He'd interfered with them in a swimming pool, something Derham admits, and both charges were proven.
And I must say it's scarred my life. Probably to say the first of my life.
Tony Derham made this confession on the Hinge program.
Well, actually, there were two girls between the ages of 10 and 13. Just sat in the swimming pool, playing games with the children, and I seem to have this need to touch young girls in a private part.
After the break, we'll return with the case against Ralph Underwager, the man who helped set Tony Derham free. There's no doubt scores of questions remain unanswered in the Mr. Bubbles case, and some of them relate to Ralph Underwager, the expert witness Tony Derham paid to testify on his behalf. Ralph Underwager was imperative to Tony Derham's defence. As a supposed independent expert, he testified that the evidence of the Bubbles children had become contaminated, and they were too young to understand their duty to tell the truth. But here in America, we've certainly discovered Underwager's reputation and credentials aren't all they're cracked up to be. Mr. Peters, are professional witnesses like Ralph Underwager dangerous?
They can be very dangerous when they...
Jim Peters is a senior attorney with the National Centre for the Prosecution of Child Abuse. He's investigated Underwager for the past 3 years.
Underwager is presented as a scientific observer, when in fact, from our perspective, more often than not, he's there as an advocate.
And anything but independent.
Anything but.
Well, he is someone who makes his living going around the country and testifying against children in child sexual abuse cases. He says the same thing in essentially every case, which is every...
And Anna Salter knows what she's talking about. A PhD from Harvard and a master's degree in early childhood. She says young children can be believed.
I mean, this is consistent with the literature. If you look at what is the best legal textbook in the country today on children as witnesses, Child Witness Theory and Practice, John Meyer says clearly children as young as 3 can comprehend the duty to tell the truth.
And this man is a highly respected legal scholar in America.
I think he's fairly clearly the chief leading scholar on child sexual abuse in the country.
6 American states have given Dr. Salter a grant to check Underwager's methods in court. And what did she find?
That he isn't accurate. That what he says in court does not necessarily fairly represent the literature.
He distorts the facts.
Frequently. Sometimes he quotes specific studies, and he's frequently wrong about what the studies say.
So we thought we'd get Dr. Salter to analyse the evidence Underwager gave under oath at the Mr. Bubbles hearing, where he testified his qualifications had never been questioned. But in an American case, the Swan case, this is what the court said about Ralph Underwager.
The court remains convinced the psychologist did not have the qualifications to testify as a doctor. The trial court ruled that the psychologist's proposed testimony was not proper because there was no indication that the results of the doctor's work had been accepted in the scientific community.
In the Mr. Bubbles case, he said his qualifications were never in question.
Well, if he's talking about the Swan ruling, you could say he was perseverating.
Lying.
Yes.
Now, the second incident in the Mr. Bubbles case was where Underwager said that 90% of accusations against child molesters are wrong. Now, is that backed up scientifically?
No, that's gobbledygook. I don't know of any study that would support that.
Now, remember, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, who Underwager and Orney co-founded, was essential in changing the narrative of the Satanic Panic into a unfounded mass hysteria. Why I'm showing you this video in this section from the 60 Minutes Australia that's so old they won't copyright strike me for it, is because they uncovered, again, how Ralph Underwager was utilizing these fake techniques to discredit the children, and in this case, get this serial pedophile off. Found innocent in a case because he demonized these children. Now, he's saying 90% of all allegations against adults regarding pedophilia are false. Can you imagine that? Like, this is how the narrative shifted. This is why it was so hard to convince people of Jeffrey Epstein.
We arranged to meet him here to talk about his involvement in the Mr. Bubbles case. And right on cue, Underwager presents his evidence.
There is a major German study that was done and reported in 1983, and a major finding is that for children who have been abused, the impact of adult behaviors toward actually abused children is more traumatic and does more harm to the children than the abuse itself.
Is that right?
Yes.
What report's this?
It's Bauermann, 1983. In German, it's Sexualität, Gewalt und psychische Folgung.
And what did Bauermann really say?
Well, I'm afraid what it said was, of the reported sexual contacts, half of the sexual victims claimed that the sexual act itself to be the main cause of injury, 1/3 the behavior of the suspect, and 1/10 each the behavior of relatives, friends, or the police. In other words, instead of saying that the majority of children were harmed by the system, they said that it was a very small minority.
Mr. Underwager, I have the Bauermann report.
Yes, sir.
It's directly opposite to what you just said.
No, I don't believe it is at all. I'm saying, I didn't say that that's what happens in every case.
No, but you said the majority of cases.
No, I don't believe I did.
Over the past couple of years, courts across America have begun saying no to Underwager, that his expert evidence is unreliable. 2 recent cases here in New York said just that. But even more damning was a case last year, the Herrick case.
It was the court's observation that Dr. Underwager's testimony was based on inadequate research, and his preparation was inadequate and therefore lacking in sound foundation.
Again, damning.
Yes, it is.
I mean, there's no bones about it there. Inadequate.
In all of these cases, that's what the courts have ruled.
So while Underwager was being rejected here in America, he had no such trouble at the Mr. Bubbles hearing in Australia, where he testified that the children were too young to tell the truth.
I don't believe that I testified to that at all. And if you'd have to produce something from the transcript. That's not what I testified to. What I testified to is, I believe, basically that up to about age 6 or 7, the psychological research suggests or shows that the concept children have of truth is going to be one primarily of what keeps me out of trouble.
Well, I do.
These people are so sick. I would like to know, and something I did not have time to prep for, but who funded Ralph Underwager? Who funded the False Memory Syndrome Foundation? Who funded Michael Orney? Would be something very interesting to know. The fact that the New York courts found his testimony to be inadequate and based off inadequate amounts of research, I mean, highlights that these people were clearly up to something, right? This isn't just like he has a difference of opinion, right? It'd be one thing if he was a sincere man and maybe he truly believed this stuff. He's citing the opposite findings of academic papers to base his analysis that all these children are making it up. In fact, forcing them to testify and forcing them to talk about it is causing more damage than someone sexually abusing them. Like, it'd be interesting to know who's funding that. Just as probably Israel. Legitimately, though. That's his concept of truth. That's not my concept of truth. I'm with Westbury here, is that he needs to go to the wood chipper. I mean, these people are just disgusting. These people are absolutely disgusting. But it really highlights something much deeper, because I want to know where this guy got his money. If he's able to fly to Australia and go from court case, I mean, he's doing stuff all around the world to defend pedophiles. Who's funding all this?
I do happen to have a part of the transcript. Fine. Let me read it to you. This is what you said in court. Children up to age 10 or 11 simply do not have the capacity to think abstractly.
Right.
And to consider what's true.
Yes.
So in effect, you're saying that these children, in the Bubbles case, aged 3 and 4, were too young to understand the truth.
No, not at all. What you are doing is distorting and twisting the language that a psychologist would use.
In relation to the Bubbles hearing, there were statements from the children saying, which I'm sure you read, what happened to them. There was positive ID of Tony Derrin as Mr. Bubbles by a number of children, plus the fact that at least 5 of the children, and all girls, were positively physically abused. Were you aware of the medical evidence at the time?
I have not reviewed the file that I had at that time.
But were you aware that there was evidence?
I'm going to stop this. We're done. I don't believe that you are being fair. And I don't believe that your approach is an impartial and objective one.
Why is that?
Because of the way that you're coming across. I mean, we're done, and I am not going to give you permission to use anything that you have taped up to this point.
You're getting a little defensive, aren't you, Mr. Underwager?
Oh, I'm getting pissed.
Do you think Underwager has got a lot to answer for over the years?
I think so. I think a lot of children have suffered at his hand. Children who probably have been abused have been put back into situations where they're likely to have been molested again.
I think that Underwager must have trouble sleeping.
Why don't you sit down and talk about
you are
all
to
your
leave,
facts,
you
all
are
this
to
research
leave,
that you quote?
leave my home.
Mr. Underwager, you have
You are
researched
to leave my home.
and quoted
I am
research
not willing to
inaccurately
continue.
and distorted it for years.
I am not
and you know
willing to
it.
continue. You're a bastard.
No, I'm not.
You're a bastard.
I just love children.
And you're a bastard. To come here under false pretenses.
Not at all. Some say that you go to court under false pretenses, Mr. Underwager.
You leave my home. Your people can leave now. You go out the door now.
Questions getting a bit hard, were they?
You go out the door now.
I would like to ask you about your qualifications. In the Mr. Bubbles case, you said that your qualifications had never been questioned in relation to the Swan case.
You go out the door now.
You told an untruth in the Mr. Bubbles hearing.
You go out the door now.
You don't want to answer that?
I'm telling you to go out the door now, or I'm calling the police.
I think you've shown your true colours. We should leave. Thank you, Mr. Underwager. Appreciate your time. Definitely don't want to continue the interview?
I'm 61 years old Saturday. And I think you are one of the most dishonorable men that I have ever met.
That's what a lot of clinical psychologists say about you. You should be aware of that.
I am fully aware of that.
Ralph Underwager has testified for the defendants in about 400 child abuse cases. We wanted to question him about his performance in some of those and about other matters too. But, as you've seen, he didn't give us the chance.
And this really only represents sort of the tip of the iceberg for the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which the advisory board is actually separate from the board or its board of directors. And that's typically where you find all of the intel assets, all of the connections to the CIA and other intel agencies, so on and so forth. But they also have interesting associations with some in the official capital S Skeptic Society, such as James Randi, who himself has had some interesting run-ins, shall we say, with accusations surrounding matters similar to what the FMSF deals with. However, that is beyond the scope of this particular episode.
Anyways, I recommend this YouTube channel. It's called Apollo's Artifacts. He has great videos covering a bunch of this stuff. Now, this is one example. This is the Danny Jones Clip channel, huge podcast, truth-speaking podcast. He has a gentleman on who's talking about, again, the false memories of this side, and he's talking about the instance of Paul Ingram and how he ended up admitting to a crime supposedly he didn't do about a satanic ritual abuse regarding his daughter, and a pastor putting his hand on the daughter and claiming that God was speaking to them and uncovering her past trauma and stuff like this. So he was talking about how his research as an investigator led to the belief that a lot of people were telling falsehoods. And I'll play that in just a second. But first, I want to play Jordan Peterson talking about the Satanic Panic and the woman who first came forth regarding the McMartin preschool story, because he parrots the official narrative here. Jordan Peterson parrots the narrative that she herself was already schizophrenic and implanted the false memory into the child.
When they were investigating the satanic daycare accusations back in the 1980s, the children would come up with absolutely hair-raising tales of satanic ritual abuse. Like, think, well, where did they get that? A child with a mother who is a paranoid schizophrenic or bordering on it would start to get delusional about what people might have been doing to her child when she left them in the daycare.
But the boy came forward and was shown by 3 different investigators that he had been sodomized. He was claiming that he had been sodomized, and 3 independent people said that he certainly was sexually abused. She did not just come forward randomly and implant this thing into his head. Now, the lady, Judy Johnson, did become diagnosed with schizophrenia later. Now, if you're sympathetic, you would say that she became schizophrenic because of the mental break that she believed satanic ritual abuse was going on at this school. The police people weren't listening. They didn't take it serious. They eventually go to trial after an investigation. And when American sentiment is in favor of this being the case, the height of the Satanic Panic, then all of a sudden the narrative flips. It's mass hysteria. These people are making it up. They're implanting the memories into their children. And we just saw that the founders of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, Martin Orney and Ralph Underwager, that these guys not only tied, in Orney's case, to the CIA, MK Ultra hypnosis, but then Underwager literally defending over 400 pedophiles around the world by convincing the court, convincing juries and judges that the children were making it up. This, what Peterson's highlighting here, is not how the McMartin case started. She did not implant this. She did not come forward without the child first coming to her and then it being physically proven. There was physical evidence. So whether she was schizophrenic or not, that should disprove the idea that nothing happened.
Disturbed, she started to bother her children. It's like, does anybody do anything to you? And children partly construct the way that they react to the world by looking at whether what they say grasps the attention of adults. The child would be struggling to find the words that would satisfy the mother's curiosity, and then they'd go to sleep at night and have a dream. And the dream would get nightmarish, and that's because the dream was trying to model what it is that the mother was calling forth out of them. And then police would come in, and they'd investigate, and they'd get even more grotesque and catastrophic fantasies out of the kids. And then they'd think, well, the kids couldn't be inventing this, but they weren't. They were co-inventing it when they were in.
Now, and this is where there's nuance. It's not that real satanic ritual abuse could happen to children, and then after a while, after they've come forward with what happened and being questioned by adults multiple times, and people asking, questions that are pointed towards specific answers or ideas of what occurred, that their narrative begins to change and their imagination begins to construct further things. But the idea that 3 to 4 to 5-year-old kids would come forward about sexual related matters or that something happened to them is really curious. Like, those children are sort of, they're existing before their sexuality. They shouldn't be sexual. They shouldn't even be aware of sexuality. So the fact that they're even talking about sex should bring up some type of question. But anyways, that was Jordan Peterson giving essentially the official narrative of the McMartin preschool case. And so let's get into the McMartin preschool case. This is Ted Gunderson. He is a police officer, private detective. And then he ended up working for the CIA. And he became aware of a lot of this stuff in the 70s and 60s. In fact, let's just pull up Ted Gunderson's Wikipedia. I'm sure it's going to say he's a conspiracy theorist. FBI, not CIA, Federal Bureau of Investigation agent. So Ted Gunderson was an American Federal Bureau of Investigation agent, author, and conspiracy theorist. Yes, we're about to hear about the conspiracies. Some of his FBI casework included the death of Marilyn Monroe and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He was the author of the best-selling book, How to Locate Anyone, Anywhere Without Leaving Home. In later life, he researched a number of topics, notably including satanic ritual abuse. And that is what I've known him for, is his work regarding the Franklin scandal and McMartin. So we're going to listen to him. He's giving a presentation right now. And what he's doing is presenting first the theories of magic, the ideas that life energy exists in the blood. So where I've clipped it, and he set up the video here, is he's talking about Aleister Crowley. So he first goes through Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati, of which we've done streams on, and highlight some of the foundational principles of Illuminism. And then he starts to go in and read sections of Aleister Crowley talking about not just some of his more speculative theories, but actual conjuration, actual ritual magic. And there's a section that he's getting ready to read about blood, about the blood sacrifice, the importance of blood, and how, from different animals, and when you do an animal sacrifice, you want the best version of that animal because there's more energy in the blood. You got to draw a circle or a triangle, and you have to place the sacrifice inside of it when you sacrifice it so that that energy is sort of metaphysically trapped. This is what magic is trying to do, and that you can then direct it, depending on which the sacrifice is, towards your ultimate aim, your ultimate goals. Those being, for Crowley, could be, in the example that he writes in the book, sacrificing a child, of which you want a smart, healthy, virgin child. You want the best version of a boy or a girl, depending on which force, he calls it. He says, whether you're giving the offering or sacrificing to Mars or Venus is going to dictate whether you need a boy or a girl for it to be more efficacious. So that's what Ted Gunderson is trying to introduce to these people. This is in the late 80s and early 90s that this video is taken. So you can imagine trying to really shake people up and talking about things that are more normal now, more common. But he's going to discuss the Crowleyan theory of blood and energy, and then he's going to start getting into the McMartin case. And I have sections here. We have, again, more. I got Nick Bryant here talking about the Franklin scandal, and then I have stuff of Ted Gunderson talking more about the Franklin scandal. So let's dive into this.
And so let's talk about some of his writings and teachings. And here we have of the bloody sacrifice. And here
this
we
is
have,
Crowley.
Blood is the life. And here on page 94 of his book, it would be unwise to condemn as irrational the practice of those savages who tear the heart and liver from an adversary and devour them while yet warm. In any case, it was the theory of the ancient magicians that any living being is a storehouse of energy varying in quantity according to the size and health of the animal and in quality according to its mental and moral character. At the death of the animal, this energy is liberated suddenly. The animal should therefore be killed within the circle. We're talking about the satanic circle, or the triangle, as the base may be, so that its energy cannot escape. An animal should be selected whose nature accords that with that of the ceremony. Thus, by sacrificing a female lamb, one would not obtain any appreciative quantity of the fierce energy useful to a magician who was invoking Mars. In such a case, a ram would be more suitable, and this ram should be virgin. The whole potential of its original total energy should not have been diminished in any ways. And now listen to this sentence, folks, closely. For the highest spiritual working, one must accordingly choose that victim which contains the greatest and purest force. A male child of perfect innocence and high intelligence is the most satisfactory and suitable system. We're talking about human sacrifices. There are, in my estimation, over 3 million practicing Satanists in America today. Now, how did I come up with those figures? I have informants. I have an informant in South Central LA, population of 200,000. Told me there were 3,000 practicing Satanists in that. That's where the famous, well-known case, McMartin case on the preschool took place. I have an informant in Lincoln, Nebraska. Told me 3,000 practicing Satanists. Lincoln, Nebraska, town of 200,000. South Bay area, Manhattan Beach area, about 200,000. How much time? 30 minutes. I get more than an hour today. So just crank up your cameras. Huh?
Okay, we're going to skip forward to where he starts talking about McMartin. I just wanted you to hear that quote from Crowley. So he's going to start getting into the McMartin case here.
Property. And so I went out and contacted him. And I said, dear sir, I would like to have access to that property. He said, I'll give you 2 weeks. I signed a contract, assumed liability, and along with some of the parents, we hired an archaeologist from UCLA, Dr. Gary Stickle, knowing full well that I'm not qualified to say there's tunnels under there even if I found them. And we began our dig. At the end of 2 weeks, I had to stall, because Dr. Stickle was not quite ready to admit there were tunnels. It took us 34 days. At noon the 34th day, with the bulldozers, with their motors running, ready to knock the building down, he was going to knock the building down and then build this office building. Dr. Stickle said, you know, I can say without any question right now, there have been tunnels under the school, they were filled in. Now, I'm going to show you the documentation on the tunnels. This is it.
So before we get into that, I just want to give you a synopsis on the McMartin preschool case. So this had to do with hundreds of acts of sexual abuse of children in California. Accusations were made in 1983 with arrest, an investigation taking place in 84 to 87 with trials from 87 to 1990. The case lasted 7 years but resulted in no convictions, and all charges were dropped in 1990. By the case's end, it had become the longest, most expensive series of criminal trials in American history. And I'm going to read to you guys the initial allegations here, because I believe the initial allegations. What came out of it was basically, again, a total reversal of American sentiments and believability of children. And some of it was, you know, fake. Like one of the children claimed that Chuck Norris molested him in one of the tunnels. And I'm sure it probably was a man who maybe looked like Chuck Norris, or maybe he confused watching Walker, Texas Ranger one day with, you know, the abuse. I don't know. But that doesn't mean that the kid wasn't abused. So in 1983, Judy Johnson, mother of one of the preschool's young students, reported to the police that her son had been sodomized by an estranged husband and also by McMartin teacher Ray Buckey. Now, as I said, what they don't tell you is that was verified by 3 different people. Buckey was the grandson of school founder Virginia McMartin and son of Administrator Peggy Martin Buckey. Johnson's belief that her son had been abused began when her son had painful bowel movements. What happened next is still disputed. Some sources state that at the time, Johnson's son denied her suggestion that his preschool teachers had molested him, whereas others say he confirmed the abuse. Johnson also made several more accusations, including that people at the daycare had sexual encounters with animals, that Peggy drilled a child under his arms, and Ray flew in the air. Bucky was questioned but was not prosecuted due to the lack of evidence. The police sent a form letter to about 200 parents of students at the McMartin school stating their children might have been abused and asking the parents to question their children. The text of the letter read. Now, it talks about that there's no evidence and all this different stuff. Okay. Some people speculate, like the people with the official narrative say this was the problem of the police, that the police department even contacted the other parents of the preschool, already created a fervor amongst the parents to implant ideas and false memories into the children, interviewing the children. Several hundred children were then interviewed by the Children's Institute International, a Los Angeles-based abuse therapy clinic run by Key McFarland. The defense alleged that the interviewing techniques used during the investigations of the allegations were highly suggestive and invited children to pretend or speculate about supposed events. By spring of 1984, it was claimed that 360 children had been abused. Astrid Heppenstall-Heger performed medical examinations and took photos of what she believed to be minute scarring, which she stated was caused by anal penetration. Journalist John Earl believed that her findings were based on unsubstantiated medical histories. Okay. Allegations. Here we go. Some of the accusations were described as bizarre, overlapping with accusations that mirrored the emerging satanic ritual abuse panic. It was alleged that in addition to having been sexually abused, the children saw witches fly, traveled in a hot air balloon, and were taken through underground tunnels. When shown a series of photographs by Danny Davis, the McMartin's lawyer, one child identified actor Chuck Norris as one of the abusers. Now, do you think a child on a stand during a hearing in front of adults and cameras, do you think he was probably nervous and maybe misidentified Chuck Norris, then celebrity in America, with one of his abusers? Quite possibly. Some of the abuse was alleged to have occurred in secret tunnels beneath the school. Now, what I'm showing you by Ted Gunderson is him revealing the evidence of these tunnels that they were prevented from bringing to trial. Several excavations turned up evidence of old buildings on the site and other debris from before the school was built, but no evidence of any secret chambers or tunnels was found. Not true. There were claims of orgies at car washes and airports and of children being flushed down toilets to secret rooms where they would be abused, then cleaned up and presented back to their parents. Some child interviewees talked of a game called Naked Movie Star and suggested they were forcibly photographed nude. During trial testimony, some children stated that the Naked Movie Star game was actually a rhythm taunt used to tease other children. What you say is what you are. You're a naked movie star, and had nothing to do with having naked pictures taken. Judy Johnson, who made the initial allegations, made bizarre and impossible statements about Raymond Bucky, including that he could fly. Though the prosecution asserted Johnson's mental illness was caused by the events of the trial, Johnson had admitted to them that she was mentally ill beforehand. Evidence of Johnson's mental illness was withheld from the defense for 3 years, and when provided was in the form of sanitized reports that excluded Johnson's statements at the order of the prosecution. One of the original prosecutors, Glenn Stevens, left the case in protest and stated that other prosecutors had withheld evidence from the defense, including the information that Johnson's son did not actually identify Ray Bucky in a series of photographs. Stevens also accused Robert Filbazian, the deputy district attorney on the case, of lying, withholding evidence from the court and defense lawyers in order to keep Bucky's in jail and prevent access to exonerating evidence. Okay. Now, eventually, they're all found innocent in this, okay? I personally believe something absolutely was going on that they knew about. This is Ted Gunderson talking about these tunnels that they claim existed before, had no relation whatsoever.
No, keep it there. Keep that there. This is what we found. This is a preliminary report. I have a 186-page scientific report available to you out here if you're interested, by the way. We found a 9-foot wide subterranean entrance under the west wall of dog room. There were 4 classrooms. That was Ray Bucky's room. By the way, Virginia McMartin and Ray Bucky were tried. Virginia, the grandmother, was acquitted. Ray had a hung jury. And we found these tunnels in the middle of the second trial of Ray Bucky. They could have been used to convict him. We called the prosecutor. He sent his investigator out, Mr. Perez. Mr. Perez told me, I don't want you entering in my conversation with the archaeologist. I said, why? He says, you're too argumentative. And I said, well, okay, you go in and talk. I'll just keep my mouth shut. We went in, he talked, and he argued with the archaeologist. Here's an investigator not qualified to talk about tunnels. He said there aren't any tunnels there, and the archaeologist, of course, argued about it. Anyway, they didn't use that evidence, strong evidence, in the second trial. They ignored it right in the middle of the second trial. I might mention this. The children identified professional football players, professional baseball players, household name actors, actresses, and the son of the leading politician, not a leading politician, the leading politician in Los Angeles as being perpetrators. Okay, we found an avocado tree root cut on both sides of the entrance, and I'll show you this in just a few minutes. The entrance to the tunnel, as I said, it was 9 feet across the top, and on one side was a live avocado root, on the other side was a dead avocado root. They had to cut that out. We have this, by the way. We found a plastic Disney bag, copyright 1982, about 4.5 feet below the classroom floor, and 3 to 6 inches in from the entrance and under the foundation. Now, the reason that plastic Disney bag is so important is because we think that they filled the tunnel in 1982 when the complaint was initially brought to the attention of the authorities. I said 83, early it's 82, when the complaint was made. And when they filled it in, the plastic Disney bag somehow or other flew in there as they were filling it in and nobody noticed it. Now, who says there is no God, right? What documentation, fantastic documentation, that tunnel, the entrance to that tunnel, this is right at the entrance, was filled in 1982 or sometime subsequent to 1982. Mr. Ken Lanning, the outstanding, know-it-all FBI expert, behavioral science, says that I took that garbage bag in 1993 out of a trash can and placed it there, that I planted evidence. Of course, Mr. Lanning says there's no organized satanic movement in this country today. There's only a few dabblers here and there. Thank you, sir. We have another 3 hours to go, okay? Can you hang in there? Okay, the tunnel proceeded south, then 45 feet through classroom 4 and 3 and north, then 10 feet within the classroom 4. The tunnels were 30 inches wide, 44 to 46 inches deep, with the top of the tunnel 30 inches under the classroom floor. The children were able to walk through it. We're talking about young kids now, right? The adults had to stoop down and walk through, but they could do it. The tunnels were built in kind of a triangular, or I should say a semicircle type, so that they had natural support, I guess. These people know everything. They were brilliant. The footing between classroom 3 and 4 was arched, where the tunnel passed underneath it, and 12 inches shorter in depth at this location than the same footing 12 feet to the north. I'll show you that in just a minute. That's significant, because the arch was where the tunnel went, and it was arched in that particular location, whereas 12 feet away, it was 12 inches longer, or thicker. Footing between, let's see, there were 4 large upright containers were found in the tunnel under the arch, hand placed. A 9-foot wide chamber was found along the tunnel across classroom 4. The top of the chamber and the top of sections of the tunnel had layers of plywood covered with tar paper, which had apparently been supported by cinder blocks and 2x2 and 2x4 wooden posts found underneath. Tunnel features made it evident that the tunnels had been hand dug. The 7-foot tunnel extended into the triplex next door. Tunnel extended from the bathrooms off the office and classroom 1 to the front yard of the triplex next door. Front yard concealed from the street by a 3-car garage. Children described the entrance and exiting tunnels in the triplex yard exactly where the tunnels and exit were found. A 39 by 41 inch area under a hole cut in this neighbor's bathroom floor had been excavated and subsequently tilled. Now, that was where the kids told us ahead of time that they were taking it up in a trapdoor in this bathroom. And there was a crawl space in the house about like this, and we got one of our skinny archaeologists to go in there, take pictures. The bathtub protruded underneath the floor of the bathroom. There was a bathroom in the back of the same building in another apartment. It did not protrude there. This was the space we're talking about, 39 by 41 inches. Just enough room for a kid to come up and be taken out. Other significant facts: small white plastic plate with 3 pentagrams, hand-drawn on the top of the light green paint, was found by the archaeologists. Pentagrams were hand-drawn by an adult and not part of the manufacturer's design. Many other artifacts were found whose analysis will be released upon completion of the test. The analysis has been released. That's the scientific report I told you about. No doorknob on classroom 3, only a dead bolt lock. Each classroom had an on and off switch which was labeled.
Hey, shout out to the Collins brothers. I just saw the Collins Brothers vlogs. Hey, the Collins Brothers are going to be coming on talking about all the UFO disclosure here soon. He said the Satanic Panic narrative was first launched in Charisma magazine, which was started by the Jesus People. I was just mentioning the Jesus People hippie movement in the beginning of the stream and talking about how influential that was in American culture. I did not know, though, that that movement was the first one that created the Satanic Panic narrative. That's really interesting. Dana Duda has documented that movement's connection to the Process Church. Oh, wow. Okay. I did not know that. Thank you very much. Shout out to the Collins Brothers. Let's get some W's in the chat for the Collins Brothers. Great researchers.
Labeled fire alarm. The system did not connect to the fire station, but was used as an alert within the school if somebody came around. More than 2,000 artifacts were found under the school floor, including over 100 animal bones. Due to the constraints and time constraints and so forth, we had to discontinue the process on noon the 34th day. By the way, this cost us, a lot of people donated their time. It still cost us money. It cost us between $55,000 and $60,000. I personally put in $17,000, which I ended up, in many instances, paying over a long-term period payment plan. This is a floor plan of the whole lot. There is, right there, the building itself. This is the entrance, the concrete slab, a vacant lot there. This is a yard. And here's the avocado tree we're talking about. And here's the entrance right there. Now here is the tunnel. It came in here, extended here, and here's the chamber across here. We think, but didn't have time to explore this. The tunnel went up here. Now we definitely were able to come up with it here, right here. And it came into the bathroom over here. Okay. There's the entrance. It's 9 feet across here. I'll show you a diagram in a few minutes. There's the avocado tree. Those roots are live. Over here, we had a dead avocado root. Okay, next. There's a plate that was found in the play yard, buried about 6 inches under the sand, with the pentagram on it. That's right. And here's a diagram of the tunnel. This is the entrance to the tunnel. Now, that's the floor, the footing for the classroom 4. Here's the plastic Disney bag, was located right there, partially under the footing and partially out. And this AF means artificial fill. And this was the shape of the entrance. Okay.
Okay, we're going to skip forward here, and then we're going to get into the Franklin scandal. This right here, it was the top of the mountain. So the area which there was an airport, and there was claim that the children went here and witnessed satanic rituals. Ted Gunderson ends up going to that location. What he does is find what appears to be some type of satanic altar. You see all these rock formations. He finds all these satanic symbols everywhere. I'll let him talk about this.
He must be invoked, be bareheaded, or otherwise he will deceive. He gives the ring of virtues, teaches arithmetic, geometry, and other handicrafts, answers all questions, makes men invisible, indicates the place of concealed treasures, and guards them if within the domain of the Amimon. Oh, what do we got here? Another satanic symbol. You think that wasn't a satanic site? Overlay it. Okay. Is that it? It's the other way around, isn't it? Yeah. Flip it around. Okay, there you go. Okay, now let's read what that sign means. That is the seal of Amsman scale. I guess no, that's the one before. Belial, a mighty king created next after Lucifer, appears in the form of a beautiful angel seated in a chariot of fire and speaking with a pleasant voice. He fell first amongst the superior angels who went before Michael and other heavenly angels. He distributes preferences of senatorships, causes favors of friends and foes, and gives excellent families. Familiar? He must have offering and sacrifices made to him. Next.
Okay. Goes through that. Goes through some of the symbols. Goes through the symbols, and here we go.
This is the official U.S. Customs report that establishes that great CIA, under the name Finders, a covert operation, is involved in the international trafficking of children. It's about 9 or 10 pages long. We'll just flip through the pages. If you want to take a look at this report, go to my table and take a look at it. And if you want, please buy it. It's $10. Make copies. Get it out to your friends. Okay, keep going. Just go real quick. Keep going.
Anyways, let's skip over to the Franklin scandal. This is Nick Bryant talking about, he has a book on the Franklin scandal. And this was an interview I found from a channel, The Zach Show. So this is from about a year and a half ago, talking about how he got into the Franklin scandal. And then the stories about beginning to investigate it. It's actually pretty fascinating.
It's been a while, but I used to have the old LG flip phone.
Yeah. I mean,
which is basically without a cell phone nowadays, without a smartphone.
I would eventually get one of those, but I was still about 3 months away from that type of embracing that type of technology. Yeah. But the Nebraska State Patrol started to call my buddy's place.
Mm. So let me back up just a bit.
Shown on the Discovery Channel in the UK, and he found a telex about the finders buying a couple of children in Hong Kong. Mm. And this is very ominous stuff. And on the last page, I mean, we put the whole report in the Franklin scandal. So on the last page of that report, it says the CIA considers this an internal matter and there will be no more investigation into the finders. And that blew me away because I kind of thought I knew how the world worked at that point. I mean, if someone had said, you know, how the world works, I thought, well, you know, I knew that the CIA fomented coups and I didn't know a lot about the mind control. I knew about the LSD side of it. Mm. So I was lacking in a lot of areas. And then I thought, well, you know, I've missed a paradigm here. I need to really look into this. So I started to dig into it. And there was a book, and I don't think it's a great book, but it's a book that kind of about something that happened in Nebraska. And then there was a documentary called Conspiracy of Silence that was to be shown on the Discovery Channel in the UK. And the plug got pulled on that. So...
And that was a project that Ted Gunderson was actually working on. That's what he's holding right here.
Is to do a video, do our own video, Rusty and John DeCamp and I. Now, on the back table back there, I've got a videotape that says Conspiracy of Silence. Let me tell you about this, and this is where I came up with the idea to grab Rusty and go find these pictures. There was a TV crew from Yorkshire Television in England that came over in the early 1990s. They were here for 7 months, and they filmed this whole case, the one I'm telling you about.
The Franklin scandal. And so if you're not familiar, I'll give you a brief overview here. The Franklin prostitution ring scandals began in 1988 in Omaha, Nebraska, when multiple prominent Nebraskan political and business figures were accused of involvement in a child sex trafficking ring. The allegations attracted significant public and political interest until late 1990 when separate state and federal grand juries concluded that the allegations were unfounded and the ring was a carefully crafted hoax. So, again, it had to do with child prostitution, taking children, and even satanic networks and that type of thing. So here's Ted Gunderson talking.
It was to be aired on Discovery Channel May the 4th, 1994, and even listed in the TV guide. But at the last minute, somebody came in and bought up the rights and ordered that all the copies be destroyed. I hold in my hand a bootleg copy of that show. And what we are going to do, Rusty and I and John DeCamp, we're going to complete this story, and nobody's going to buy us off. I don't know if we can get it on Discovery Channel or not, but we're going to do our own video. We're going to basically include the information here on this video, and we're going to update it. We're going to include the $1 million judgment. We're going to include information about more details about the kidnapping ring, and including an interview with Noreen Gosh. Noreen Gosh's 12-year-old son was kidnapped back in 1982. Johnny Gosh. There's a book out. It's called Why Johnny Can't Come Home. And I was supposed to have a case up here tonight, but something happened. I guess, I don't know, maybe they're in the mail someplace. But Paul Benassi helped kidnap Johnny Gosh. And he gave us a statement to that effect. And And they took Johnny that first day. He was kidnapped on a Sunday. He was delivering his Sunday Des Moines Register. Took him to a safe house in Sioux City, Iowa. They kept him there. And according to information developed by the mother, Noreen Gosh, the snatching of the child was ordered by a fellow named Michael Aquino. Michael Aquino, head of the Temple of Set.
Everybody should know Michael Aquino is... I brought him up before multiple times. He looks like a Satanist. So he was a military officer, Satanist, was the founder of the Temple of Set, which is a theistic. This isn't LaVeyan Satanism, atheistic, symbolic LARPing. This is theistic Satanism here. This is Michael Aquino literally shaping his eyebrows to look like horns. So that's who he's referring to here, who founded the Temple of Set, who he met with.
Out of San Francisco. This is in her book. And Michael Aquino wrote me a letter because I quoted him someplace and challenged me on it, but I said, hey, it's in the book. It's in Noreen Gosh's book. Anyway, young Johnny and another kid ended up stealing a car, and they went into hiding. They lived on an Indian reservation for quite a while up in northern Minnesota. And they were discovered there, and they had to move on. Yeah, Johnny Gosh is alive today. I know approximately where he is. But he doesn't dare come forward because he knows too much. He knows too many people who are involved. The video, by the way, that's back there on the back desk, is I'm selling it for $30. And if you decide to buy it, the second video will be sent to you free.
Okay. All right, so let's go back to Nick Bryant talking about him uncovering the details of the Franklin scandal.
I had a friend of mine, one of my best friends lives in Omaha, Nebraska, and I called him up and I said, dude, let's hang out. I'm going to look into this story. I mean, I don't know if there's really much there, but, we haven't hung out in a while, so let's hang out. And then I got to Nebraska, and then I started realizing, I talked to a blackmail photographer, I talked to a victim, I talked to a lot of people, and people were frightened to talk about this. Very frightened. It was like I was doing an expose on the KGB and Stalinist Russia.
Yeah. Was your friend with you when you were going around to all these people, or did you just get to your friend's house, you put your stuff down, and you go, I got some things to do. I'll grab some dinner later, but I'm going to go, talk to some people first.
No, actually, we had dinner that night, and I kind of filled him in on exactly what I was there. But, I knew that something had gone down in Nebraska. But there was innuendo that these kids were getting flown around the country, that it was connected to intelligence, that these pedophilic pimps were plundering Boys Town. So these things I had great difficulties with. But I studied philosophy in college. And the goal, at least how I see philosophy, is, or Socrates talked a lot about this. Socrates has been trashed by Ab Stone, but I like old Soc. He said to approach everything agnostically. And that's what I really try to do. I try to approach everything agnostically. Although I was skeptical about this, I kept my mind open. I thought, well, I'll investigate. And I did come across documents when I was in Nebraska. Actually, I got a leads list that had like 60 victims and a lot of other documentation. And then the fear was so palpable. And the blackmail photographer, now here's a guy that takes compromising pictures of adults and children. And so he's not going to be the paragon of virtue or veracity. But he was telling me about it, and I thought he was telling me the truth. And then I talked to one of the victims whose story is way out there. But he also, I felt he was telling me the truth, or as much truth as he was aware of. And then the Nebraska State Patrol, this was in 2002. I did not even have a cell phone at this point. If you can imagine living without a cell phone.
So it's been a while, but I used to have the old LG flip phone.
Yeah. I mean,
which is basically without a cell phone nowadays, without a smartphone.
I would eventually get one of those, but I was still about 3 months away from that type of embracing that type of technology. But the Nebraska State Patrol started to call my buddy's place, and my buddy's lived in Omaha most of his life, and he had some connections. And one of the guys, he had a friend who had a friend who was busted selling marijuana, rather large quantities. And he was talking to his friend, and then the guy who was busted said that he had been part of that network, providing drugs, that he had been a courier. And he just broke down crying. So then it really started to freak my friend out, and actually it started to freak me out.
Mm.
And then on my last night there, I was waiting for my friend to come home, and we were going to cook a dinner, and this freaky-looking woman came. Now, he's living in an apartment complex.
Yeah.
This freaky-looking woman came to the door and said, I want to give you a book. And at this point, I was freaked out, and I did not want...
Did she say what book, or...
No,
she
she had a book, and she said, I want to give you... I never... But at that point, I was freaked out. I did not want my fingerprints on that book, and I did not want her fingerprints in my buddy's apartment.
Mm.
So I said, just go...
She seemed like she was going to do something violent, or...
No, she just seemed crazy, and she wanted...
Okay.
And it was like she was programmed to give me the book. And I said, no, I don't want the book. Go away. But she was at the door for quite some time. And then my buddy, and then she leaves, and then my buddy comes, and he sees her in the lobby.
Yeah.
And I said to him, did you just see a really freaky looking woman with red hair? And he goes, yeah, really, really freaky looking. And so he started to make dinner, and I was watching the History Channel.
Mm.
And lo and behold, she came back. And she started knocking on the door, wanting to give me the book again. And then he and I huddled, and I said, Dirk, I don't know if I should have my... and I was getting freaked out at this point.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't want her fingerprints in your apartment, and I don't want my fingerprints on that book. So I think that we should not let her into the apartment.
Mm.
And right before she left, she said, you're in a great deal of danger, and they're going to kill you.
Did she seem like she had a different energy when she said that? Did she shift at all? Did she get clear? Or was it the same energy when she said they're coming for you?
No, there was some gravitas when she said that to me.
Mm.
And then I came back to New York, and I had a mentor. His name was Joe Bouncer. He was a retired journalist, writer. And I really loved him. And we would get together every Saturday and have breakfast. And we were walking through Washington Square Park. And I was really freaked out. I mean, I was looking for snipers. And I said, Jerry, it's all real. All of it. Everything. It's all of it. It's much bigger and uglier and more malignant than I ever could have thought. And we sat down on a park bench, and he said, this is going to be dangerous. If you decide not to pursue it, I will understand that.
Mm.
I won't think anything less of you. And I said, they got away with, and when I say they, I'm talking about the government.
Yeah.
I said, they got away with destroying so many children. Nobody paid a price. And I'm just going to have to go for this. And I didn't have a wife at that point, and I didn't have any children.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I still don't have a wife, and I still don't have children. But, so I didn't have to worry about a family. And then I went for it. I spent the next 7 years of my life.
And that's what got you into the Franklin scandal, the entrance, that editor saying, find me something satanic. And then you come back from Omaha, you tell him the story of that creepy woman, all the shit you saw, and you goes, that's satanic enough for you? I think we're onto something here.
No, he said,
or Satanism. Didn't you say, I want something with Satanism?
Yeah. But, and then I showed him the Finder's document.
Yeah.
And I said, this is a huge story. And then he goes, well, Nick, why don't you just stick to what we'd originally talked about?
Yeah.
And at that point, I was really full tilt on this story. I was going to do this story.
Okay. So I want to take a step back a little bit.
So are you picking up what he's putting down here? That, again, he was skeptical of the entire Franklin scandal, of the boys being trafficked for child prostitution, that this involved high-level political and business figures running out of Boys Town in Omaha, Nebraska. And then upon going there and trying to talk with victims and the pedophile blackmail photographer, that the state troopers begin to contact him, weird women coming, trying to give him a book, and then tells him that he's in grave danger, they're going to kill him, leaves, comes back, and he's highlighting the Finder's document. Again, remember the Finders, Tallahassee, Florida, 1987, where two well-dressed gentlemen in suits from D.C. get stopped with a van of 6 children in the back. Find out it's a satanic cult kind of based out of Florida, but operating all over the country, different states, and it's all backed by the CIA. And notice how the U.S. government keeps showing up in all this stuff over and over again. Again, I think the Franklin scandal is the most historically similar to the current Epstein fiasco. Ghost Fella throws in 20, no comment. Thank you very much, Ghost Fella. Have you guys looked into a lot of this stuff before? Is any of this stuff new for you guys in the chat? Have you guys looked into the Franklin scandal, McMartin preschool scandal, false memory syndrome? Not at all, says Great Schema Groiper. I'm telling you, it's dark. That's why I didn't do this topic during Pascha, because it gets so ominous. And it's so real. It's so real. Danielle has. Madison throws in 10, no comment. Thank you very much, Madison. Thank you all for helping me try to reach my super chat goal today. I greatly appreciate you guys. We're only 12 shy of the 30 super chat goal. Thank you very much, Madison, for the support. The Bombasticus, that's a great name, throws in 10, says, hello, David. Two things. One, where can I donate for the stream with Jose on the Spanish Empire? Two, I heard the Templars used to steal children and sacrifice them to Baal. There's a lot of rumors about what the Templars were up to. I've talked about some of the rituals where they're like kissing penises, kissing anuses, speculated Baphomet worship. Now, I've known a guy that is a researcher as well, and he is someone who has read a lot about the Templars. He's actually very skeptical of a lot of the nefarious narratives about the Templars. I don't know. I certainly believe they adopted some Gnostic tendencies. I don't think they were traditionally Christian by the time they kind of come out of the Crusades. Maybe some of them were. I'm not sure, but but who knows? It's debated about the historical sources, but Baphomet worship is claimed to have begun with the Templars as well. There are some interesting connections between Scottish Rite Freemasonry and the end of the Templars moving up to Scotland under Robert the Bruce. But anyways, in regards to donate for the stream with Jose on the Spanish Empire, for those of you who don't know, Jose Miguel, friend, fellow scholar, author now, go subscribe to his Substack. He joins me on some of the open panels, always insightful, very, very knowledgeable about history. He mentioned that he would love to do a stream with me where somebody sponsored for both of us to spend about a day or two doing research on the topic of the Spanish Empire and the Spanish conquest of Mexico, most specifically. So I don't have a place where you can just donate to that. Now, the stream for that is $500. We're going to split it even, $250 to me and Jose. So I don't have a place. We can try to raise money for it. The next stream I'm doing is Vladimir the Great, the community sponsored stream that you guys sponsored. So that's going to be covering the life and some of the battles of Vladimir the Great. What am I talking about? Vlad the Impaler, not Vladimir the Great. Vlad the Impaler was the community sponsored stream that you guys had. I don't know what I'm talking about. But Vlad the Impaler is my next stream, so that's probably going to be Friday. But maybe we can try to raise money for the Spanish Empire one if you guys want. I'm not sure how to create a hub for money. I don't know. We could do a GoFundMe, I guess, a $500 GoFundMe or something like that. But anyways, I'm not sure. I don't have a place. Someone mentioned they were going to sponsor the whole stream. So anyways, Blink 4444 throws in $20. Thank you so much, my man. He says, I'm behind the live feed. I'm at the section where the testimonies of abuse are happening. Ugh. Hearing this kind of stuff really fills me with rage, and to see wrath poured out on these perps, Lord have mercy. Yeah, I'm with you, man. Even researching this topic, and it weighs on you. I was thinking about, last night while I was laying in bed, going over some of the stuff and just the mental images, just the realization of how pervasive all this stuff is. Ghoulie throws in 10. Thank you so much. He says, thank you, brother, for all the work you do. You've been an integral to my journey to the faith. Well, glory to God, man. Going to be chrismated in a couple months. God bless you. That's wonderful. Welcome home. That's the goal of what we do here, is trying to get people to convert to the church. Glory to God, my man. And Nectarios throws in 5, no comment. Thank you very much, Nectarios, for the support. If you guys have any questions or comments or would like to support the stream, feel free to do so using Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or YouTube. We're about 12 shy of our YouTube goal. So if you're feeling generous, please give some Kotal Crew memberships. I have members content coming out, and everyone appreciates a good gifted membership, right? So, okay, let's continue forward now with the Franklin scandal and get into some of the details.
Because I think we should give people an overview of what the Franklin scandal actually was, the major players, the location. We've already mentioned Omaha, the mechanisms, exactly what was going on with the Franklin scandal and the whole architecture of that thing, the thing that was in Franklin.
Okay, with the Franklin scandal, you had 2 primary pimps. One was Lawrence E. King in Omaha, and one was Craig Spence in Washington.
Also, just want to give another special shout out to Paisios. Paisios sponsored today's stream. Major shout out and thank you to you, my brother. He provided me with so much great resources for diving into today's topic. So major shout out to you, Paisios. Everyone in the chat, give a shout out to Paisios. Major thank you for sponsoring today's stream.
Washington, D.C. King was the CEO of a credit union called the Franklin Credit Union, ergo the Franklin scandal. And Spence was a power broker and D.C. lobbyist. And
this is in Omaha, right? Franklin Credit Union, but in Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah, okay. But the other pedophilic pimp was in Washington, D.C.
Okay, and that's Craig Spence.
So King and Spence flew these kids, and I ended up with a bunch of their passenger manifests, flew these kids to Washington, D.C. on a weekly basis. And Spence was a CIA asset, and his house was wired for audiovisual blackmail. And they would have these parties there. And now, a lot of the time, it was just guys that were already compromised. But if they did compromise someone, it would be a party. It would be like a Washington, D.C. type of cocktail party.
Socialites, high society.
Senators, representatives, people in the cabinet. I mean, everybody.
I'm sure celebrities too, actors, stuff, people like that.
Everybody up the upper echelon went to these parties. So at a certain point, someone would, after the guests had been plied with alcohol, someone would fire up a joint or break out a line of coke or something sexually inappropriate would happen. And the people that wanted no part of that would leave, but then the people that wanted to stick around, they would become compromised.
So, yeah, it would start with Lawrence King and Craig Spence. Craig Spence was the one in D.C. running these high society parties. Essentially, and this is what it sounds like with the Franklin scandal, but also Epstein, Diddy. There's phase 1 of the party, which is like ground level, and you start drinking a little bit. There's no really hard drugs out, or if there are, it's not really visible. And then all of a sudden, people start to go home. Maybe people with kids are like, all right, we're out of here. We're not going to continue. It's midnight. And then all of a sudden, phase 2 hits. Drugs start coming out in the visible realm. Maybe people are making out, some sexual innuendo. People start talking about, like, do you want to stick around for the real party, stuff like that. Is that kind of the vibe of these parties? Like, you get to see who was really down as the night went on when people become more intoxicated.
It was called the party after the party. And Nebraska Social Services, kids had come forward to Nebraska Social Services, and they were aware that Lawrence E. King was running this nationwide pedophile network.
Yeah, because Julie Walters in the book.
Yes.
She was one of the Boys Town social workers, which is where King was getting a lot of these kids. And we'll talk about the whole Boys Town pipeline, but one of the parts of the book that I found fascinating was that Julie Walters, this Boys Town social worker, writes a report describing this child exploitation ring. And then she gives it to the FBI, or I forget exactly who she hands it to, but then there's basically no follow-up. Like, nothing really came of it.
Well, she handed it to, first of all, the guy who ran Boys Town, Father Val Peter. And he was aware that Boys Town was a pedophilic smorgasbord. But he covered it all up.
Yeah.
And I think it had started under his predecessor, Father Hupp, was a drunk. And the number 2 guy was Father James Kelly. And he'd been in upstate New York molesting kids. A lot of kids. And then the Catholic Church in its infinite wisdom moved him to Boys Town. So Boys Town was ripe at that point. The director of Boys Town,
the good old Catholic Church, just moving priests to where they'll be even more tempted by young boys to diddle. This is why priests need to be married and why you need to become Orthodox.
It was kind of a titular head, he was a drunk. And then the number 2 guy was a pedophile. And I think that Father James Kelly got compromised.
Yeah. So where does a guy? You hear about these characters like King, Epstein, Spence. How are these people born? Because they have to come from somewhere. Not literally born, but like how are they born into the fires of this blackmail pedophilic world? What is the entry point? And with the Franklin scandal, I guess it would be King and Spence. And we could start with King first. Where is Lawrence King coming from? What is his entrance into this world, and where was he before that?
Well, both King and Spence came like Epstein and like Diddy. They came from working class families. And I think King and Spence were in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. King had a top security clearance for the Air Force, and Spence was an ABC reporter. And my guess on this is just my surmise, but I think I'm probably right. I think that both of them got busted molesting little boys in Southeast Asia. And then...
Are there any documents linking them in
no.
like the same squadron and stuff like that?
None.
Okay.
But, this is just my extrapolation. Yeah. They got busted, and the dark, malignant corner of intelligence that does this type of thing said, well, you can either go to prison or you can work for us. And because when both of them came back to the United States, their careers just exploded. So something happened to them in Southeast Asia, both of them, that enabled their careers to explode, and I think that was it.
Yeah, that's what it seems like when I read about a lot of these cover-ups, is that people, it seems like they get compromised and then they fail upwards. They participate in a cover-up, people are not happy, but then all of a sudden they get a judge position or cabinet position. It's this weird upwards movement of people you wouldn't think would be qualified or you wouldn't think would be excelling in certain positions. They just keep somehow moving up the ladder.
Clarence Thomas is a perfect example of that.
Is he the
Supreme Court Justice
okay.
That's essentially declared war on American citizens? And he's a porno junkie, and he's also... there was those hearings.
I knew about the hearings against Clarence Thomas, but I never heard these things about him.
Between Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas for him to become a Supreme Court Justice. And it was a he said, she said affair. But there were like 7 Anita Hills. And there was one, Angela Wright, who was in Washington, D.C. She was going to back up Anita Hill. But Joe Biden was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And he didn't call her, and he lied about that. He said that she didn't want to testify, but she was willing to testify.
Yeah.
So he lied about that. And that's kind of shows you where the politics are, because Clarence Thomas's decisions have been antithetical to what the Democratic Party ostensibly believes. But yet Biden let this pervert on the Supreme Court, and he was rewarded. So that's kind of the line. And the blackmail photographer who I talked to, because when I was...
Is this Rusty Nelson? Okay.
And I said, this is when I was first cutting my teeth on it. I said, well, how does this work? This is such a weird parallel universe. I said, how does this work? And he goes, once you're compromised, it's like you're on a yacht, and it's a beautiful day, and it's a beautiful yacht, and you can have anything you want on the yacht. But if you decide to get off the yacht, the people on the yacht are going to make sure that you drown. So there's zero incentive for people to get off the yacht. And if they stay on the yacht, they will become upwardly mobile.
Okay, so you think, in your best educated guess, that Spence and King had something happen where they're molesting boys in Southeast Asia, they get caught up and they're given a fork in the road, which is you're fucked or you get on the yacht.
Yes.
And they both chose to get on the yacht.
They both chose the yacht, yeah.
And so what happens when they get back to America? What's sort of the trajectory of Spence and King to get into the positions that they found themselves in?
Okay, King was got this job at the Franklin Community Credit Federal.
And for those, we didn't fully introduce King and Spence. This is Lawrence King. This is the gentleman. They don't have a picture of him. He was an African-American politician. Let me see if I can find a photo of Lawrence King Franklin scandal. There you go. There's a little picture of Lawrence King Jr. right there. So he is the one that's accused of leading this, along with the gentleman named Spence. Where is he at on here? I don't even see him listed here. Okay. Anyways, that's who they're talking about when he keeps referring to Lawrence King as this African-American politician in Omaha.
Federal Union. And now, I've been told that it was Susie Buffett that gave King the money to really get it going. Warren Buffett's first wife.
Okay.
Warren Buffett, actually King threw a party for Warren Buffett, but Warren Buffett lied in the media and said that he'd never been to the party.
Is that, where did you hear that? Is that from documentation
I believe it's in an Esquire magazine.
Okay, that's Susie Buffett.
No, I heard that Susie Buffett gave King the money.
Okay.
But, and there's no way that Susie Buffett's going to pony up a lot of money unless Warren knows about it. That's my belief on that. So I believe that there was Buffett money behind the Franklin Credit Union.
Okay, so King establishes the credit union with the help of Susie Buffett, according to what you've heard, according to rumor. Then how does he start the Boys Town pipeline? Does he start going after children right away? Is he actually trying to function as a credit union at all? Is he, trying to at least keep up a facade, or what's sort of his deal?
Well, he turned that credit union into a boiler room. And they were offering CDs at way below the market rate. And he ultimately embezzled like $40 million. The Feds say $40 million from the Franklin Credit Union. With him, drug addicts find each other. They just know where to go. I mean, you could pull a drug addict off the streets of Philadelphia or Miami, and you could airlift him in New York City, and they would find out where to get drugs. And I think pedophiles are the same way. And as I said earlier,
it's like a bat signal, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, they're tuned in. And the number 2 guy at Boys Town was Father James Kelly, who was a notorious pedophile. So I don't know how those two connected, but I definitely believe that they connected.
Okay. And so I wanted to go back to Rusty Nelson, because you brought him up, and I'm remembering there's an incident in the book where, didn't you drive from Minnesota to Nebraska at one point to investigate, and then you actually picked up Rusty Nelson? Can you tell that story of what happened when you guys got pulled over?
Well, Rusty said that he had blackmail pictures. Rusty is supposed to register as a sex offender. And I got money to one of his attorneys so he could fight it. And under the condition, he said that he had blackmail pictures, under the condition that he gave me the blackmail pictures. So he took me on this wild goose chase in Colorado for these blackmail pictures. And I quickly concluded that after a couple of days that he was just bullshitting me. Like I said, given his vocational pursuits, he's not going to be the
not the most reliable guy, blackmail pedophilic photographers.
So I was driving back. I was going to drop him off at his girlfriend's place, and we were on this desolate highway. And I got pulled over. And I start the book with this. The cop has, I show the cop my driver's license. He doesn't, he doesn't want to see my driver's license. He doesn't want to see my registration. He just wants me to get in his car. And I get in the car,
Did he even bother saying why he pulled you over, or was it one of those things where you're just like, it's better to comply in a situation than
No, he said I was doing, I think it was 64 in a 60 mile an hour. So
oh yeah, that makes sense. 4 miles over, you're dangerous to society.
It was very nominal, and but we're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, and I'm with someone who's got a very bad record because he's done some very bad things. So it's a tough situation for me, and I got out, and that guy was polished. Most of these Nebraska State Patrol guys I met are kind of obese, and they don't seem to have like a tremendous amount of gray matter.
Yeah, they're not going to win a chase. You could just walk at a normal pace away from them, and you'll be fine.
But this guy was pretty polished, pretty buff, and he was different than these other Nebraska State Patrol troopers I met. So,
was it just his physical appearance, or was it energy-wise too?
Everything.
Giving off
his physical appearance, his energy. It was like he'd been minted in Langley. I mean, that's the vibe.
Like a CIA Captain America.
Yeah, that's the vibe that I got from him. So he put me in this car, and he called in for priors. I don't have priors. Then he calls up for backup, and then he calls in Rusty's name, and then the dispatcher gives a lot of numbers, and I know that they're very bad numbers because it's Rusty Nelson. So then they take Rusty Nelson and they put him between. I'm in the squad car, and this other Nebraska State Patrol guy has pulled up, and they put Rusty between the two cars. Now, the guy that showed up struck me as a Nebraska State Patrol guy. He had a dog, and they just ripped everything apart in this SUV that I'd rented. I mean, everything.
Yeah.
And they found nothing because I'd been on this wild goose chase. And but yeah, I think that was the most frightened I was.
Yeah.
And frankly, because I'm with a very nefarious guy, and we're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, the cop said to me, "We can search your car now, or we can arrest you and pound the car and search it. We're going to go one of two ways."
Yeah.
So I knew that like ACLU buzzwords were not going to ameliorate the situation. It was that guy was going to search that car.
Yeah. No, it sounds like a very jarring situation. I wasn't. I mean, I did have a similar thing. I wasn't with someone who the law was after, but I was speeding across, and I get pulled over. They is watching that car with.
There was that.
Yeah.
That problem also. So yeah, I was. That was, as I said, it was the most frightened I was throughout my entire Franklin Odyssey.
So what is the orchestration like between? So you have the kids from Boys Town that are getting molested as part of the Franklin scandal being run by King. Lawrence King is in Omaha, and then you have Spence who's in D.C. How is that coming together? Like, is Spence making trips out to Omaha to also molest kids? Is King flying back and forth from D.C.? Like, how are they sort of intersecting to jointly run this molestation operation, essentially?
I think Spence would occasionally fly to Nebraska with some power broker types. But I acquired like 200 passenger manifests of Kings. Yeah. And the vast majority go to he was flying to Washington, D.C. like every weekend.
Yeah. And so Gary Caradori is one of the heroes of this story. Can you tell the story of how Caradori gets involved and what his role is in the Franklin scandal?
Okay, what happened was King got busted embezzling the $40 million shortly after George Herbert Walker Bush won the election. And he gets arrested, and there's some senators in the Nebraska Senate it comes out that he hasn't been audited in 4 years. Federally insured credit unions have to be audited every year. And when it came out that he was able to get $40 million and it hadn't been audited in 4 years, they formed the Franklin Committee to look into that. And shortly after they formed the Franklin Committee, social services people approached them and said, King's a thief, but he's also running a pedophile network. And they had, like, Julie Walters' report, and they had other things, too. A couple of kids had come forward on record. And then these social services personnel had given this information to both state and federal law enforcement, and they were just ignored. there wasn't any type of investigation whatsoever. So they went to the senators and they said, King is running a pedophile network and you guys should look into that too. And the Nebraska Senate subcommittee eventually hired an amazing investigator named Gary Caradori. And he was finding other kids. Like, I've got all his investigative reports. As I said earlier, I've got like 200 passenger manifests. Those were the passenger manifests that Gary Caradori got. Everything that Gary Caradori acquired, I eventually acquired. And then he started really pursuing the child abuse angle. And as he was pursuing this, the FBI was threatening witnesses, threatening him. His phones were tapped. The FBI was heavily involved, the Omaha office, in covering this up. And Gary Caradori realized that one of the victims, her name is Alicia Owen, who came forward to Gary Caradori, told him that her lawyer had said that if she gave, if she said that Gary Caradori gave them money in a script, that her problems would be taken care of. And so, and she relayed that to Gary Caradori. And at that point, Gary Caradori realized that he had become the prey, not the predator. And he was an amazing investigator. And that was his thing, that was one of his favorite things, was getting girls out of trafficking scenarios.
Do we know who approached Alicia Owen exactly, instead if you say...
Anyways, that's enough details about the Franklin scandal. You guys can, I'll share the link if you guys want to watch more of this. But I want to return to what Paisios wanted me to conclude and at least talk about in the stream is, one, the psychological effects of satanic ritual abuse, one, that they're real, but then how the false memory syndrome foundation and that being normalized among psychologists and really the American public discredited victims, and how the consequences of satanic ritual abuse cause real mental illness. We're talking about schizophrenia, paranoia, immense anxiety, bipolarism, all types of different things. And we wanted to conclude with something hopeful. And so we're not going to play this video, but I'm going to share the link to an activist of the child martyr Gabriel, protector of vulnerable children. And he wanted me to share this because in case anyone out there would like to hear it or utilize it, that resource can now be available. Also, and let me read the way he described these things, because I thought it was well said. So the activist sung on YouTube, he says, there's places in the tradition where we learn that demons can be sufficiently high rank that the prayers of an exorcist can be ineffective, and more simple Holy Father is needed to cast them out. Victims of childhood ritual abuse may be infested with demons that are more resistant to exorcism, which is obviously the case. We've done whole streams talking about exorcism. Such people should be treated with compassion and love, and he wanted to share this Trisagion Films, which they make great content, on Blessed Simplicity about Abba Paul the Simple. It's really a great video. I watched, in fact, we could watch it if you guys want to. It's 10 minutes long. But I wanted to share that with you guys as well. And then this was St. Pachamios and the man who saved through a demon. If you guys want to listen to or read that story, it's in that YouTube video. But anyways, let's end on a hopeful note on Abba the Paul the Simple, because Paisios mentioned that asceticism is part of the way that we deal with demons. Remember the stream that we did on exorcism and talked about how the Catholic Church created an official office of the exorcist, something that the East never did. And part of that is because the West lost some of the ascetic emphasis of the liturgical life throughout the calendar year, just the general practices. I mean, the Catholic fast, Lenten fast, is much easier than the Orthodox fast. And it's because we in the East believe that asceticism is part of the purification of the body and essential for being released from demons. And that the passions are ways in which we can be entrapped and we can actually ensnare demons within inside of us. So that's why the asceticism of Ava Paul the Simple is something that resonated with him. And then finally, the Athonite Fathers, the video that I just shared with you guys, revealed to a monk that those tormented by demons in this life are given some of the highest places in paradise, as long as those who endure their cross patiently. I can get you the... So, anyways, talking about all things is providence, even child abuse to some degree. It's not providence that it happens, but, God permits all things. We don't know the reason, but as he highlighted, it can be salvific for someone if that's the hurdle that they have to overcome in one way or another. So anyways, here is Abba Paul the Simple. We'll end on a high note, an Orthodox high note.
Palestine and Syria, to the caves and cells of Mount Athos, and even beyond to the vast forests of northern Russia. These are the chronicles of the desert. Blessed are they, wrote Saint Isaac the Syrian, who for the sake of their love of God have girded their loins with simplicity and an unquestioning disposition to meet the sea of affliction, and do not turn their backs. Such an example of this is Abba Paul, a simple farmer in 3rd century Egypt, who came home one day only to discover his wife in the midst of a long-running affair. You can have her, Paul remarked with a laugh. As for me, I'm going to become a monk. He then set out for the desert, and after some time he arrived at the cell of Abba Anthony. What do you want? Asked Anthony. I want to become a monk. But you're 60 years old. You cannot become a monk here, replied Anthony. Go back home and give thanks to God, for you cannot endure the trials of the desert. Whatever you teach me, replied Paul, I will do it. Listen, old man, if you really want to become a monk, go to a cenobium with enough brethren to support you in your old age. I'm alone here and only eat after 5 days fast. Anthony shut the door and remained inside for 3 days. But on the 4th day, he found Paul still outside. Go away, old man. Why do you pester me? You cannot stay here. Paul replied, It is impossible for me to die anywhere else than here. Anthony, not wanting the death of the old man marked upon his soul, decided to let Paul in and put him to the test. Take these palms and weave them into mats just as I do, said Anthony. Paul did so until the 9th hour, weaving a large number of mats. At this, Anthony looked upset. You've done it all wrong. Unpick them and weave them again in this manner. Paul, rather than complain or ask if he could satisfy his hunger, did as he was told, to which Anthony felt great compunction. After sunset, Anthony asked, Would you like a piece of bread? As you please, Father, said Paul. Again, Anthony felt compunction, as Paul did not rush to eat, but rather gave the choice to him. He then laid out 4 biscuits, 1 for himself and 3 for Paul. He wanted to test the old man's endurance by singing the same hymn and psalms 12 times. But Paul eagerly joined in. When Anthony finally ate a biscuit, so did Paul. Then Anthony said, Father, eat another biscuit. To which Paul replied, I will if you will. I have eaten enough, said Anthony, for I am a monk. I have eaten enough, said Paul, for I want to become a monk. Anthony then again chanted the same prayer and psalms 12 times before catching a little sleep. In the morning he said, If you can do this every day, you can stay with me. Paul said that he could and remained with Anthony. Some months later, Anthony saw grace working within the old man, and so he made him a cell 3 miles away. Behold, you have become a monk. Remain alone that you may be tried by demons. And so Paul lived in solitude for a year, and through great struggle was counted worthy of grace over demons and diseases. Then one day, a man brought an exceedingly terrifying demoniac to Anthony. "This is beyond me," said Anthony, "for power over one of this rank belongs only to Paul." And so they walked for 3 miles to the cell of Abba Paul. "Abba," said Anthony, "cast out this demon so that this man may go home cured." "But what of you?" asked Paul. "I have other things to attend to this day," said Anthony as he departed. And so Abba Paul prayed over the man and then said, "Abba Anthony said, 'Get out from this man.'" "I will not get out, old man," cried the demon. Paul then took his sheepskin and struck the man on the back. Abba Anthony said, "Get out." Again the demon cursed, and the man thrashed violently. "You are going out," said Paul. "If you don't go out, I will tell Christ, and he will harm you." "I am not going out," cried the demon. Abba Paul then walked up a hill at high noon, when the heat of the Egyptian sun acted like a furnace. He stood on a rock and prayed, "O Jesus Christ, I will not come down from this rock. I will not eat nor drink until either I die or you drive out this spirit from the man and free him." At these words the demon thrashed violently and said, "Oh, the agony! I am being driven out by the simplicity of Paul. He drives me away. Where am I to go?" The demon then jumped out of the man, and taking on the form of a dragon, slid off into the Red Sea. Abba Paul lived many more years in the desert, and performed many wonders before his repose. St. John of Sinai writes about Abba Paul and his work, "The Ladder of Divine Ascent," calling him the thrice blessed rule, and type of blessed simplicity. Let all of us, just as St. John counsels, who wish to draw near to the Lord, do so like Abba Paul, simply, without hypocrisy, duplicity, or guile, as the Lord himself is simple, and wants souls that approach him to be innocent and simple. "For surely," says St. John, "you will never see simplicity separated from humility."
I love Trisagion Films. They make the best videos. But that's going to do it for today's stream. Again, a major thank you to Paisios, providing a unique angle on satanic ritual abuse, talking about false memory syndrome, sending me those couple documents that I was able to read through regarding schizophrenia and how that affected, essentially, and recharacterized the satanic panic. So anyways, thank you all so much for the support, for everyone who supported the stream today. God bless you all. The next stream will be the community-sponsored one on Vlad the Impaler. Unfortunately, can't stream tomorrow, so I'll do that Friday. And I'll be talking with the other sponsors. I only have 2 more sponsored streams. So if you are interested in sponsoring a stream, please do so. Because I'm going to be, after this week, I got 1 more, and then I'm going to be free to do whatever content if anybody's interested. So here is the link right here if anybody's interested in sponsoring a stream. And then I'll email you, and you can let me know what topic it is that you'd be interested. But thank you all. How many guys? That's a good way to end such a dark stream. That was a bit heavy with the McMartin preschool case, all the satanic abuse, Ralph Underwager, and him trying to defend these pedophiles. Flat Earth. There was a couple people that wanted to do Flat Earth. Again, I don't know if that's the topic. Shout out to Crispy. Shout out to all the mods, man. Appreciate you, Crispy. God bless you, man. Always see you in the chat. Thank you. Jacob, God bless you, brother. He says, great stream nonetheless. Thank you very much, man. God bless you. And let me just double check. Make sure I don't miss anyone. Shannon says, Vlad the Impaler sounds great. It's going to be a fun one for sure. That one's going to be a fun one. I'm looking forward to it. All right, guys. That's going to do it for me. God bless you all. I will see you Friday for sure. And as always, until then, God bless.